the City of Fort Worth Redistricting Task Force. My name is Sal Espino, and I am the chairman of the Redistricting Task Force. I'm here with Mr. Burt Williams, who's the vice chair of this task force. And I guess before we get started, I want to go around this table because we do have some new members. And if you want to introduce yourselves and maybe one sentence about you, and that way we can go forward. So I'll start with you, Mr. Vice Chair. Please explain and who you are and what you've done, or anything you want to say about yourself. Please, because this meeting is televised and online.
Burt Williams, a community activist, and just a whole lot of stuff. So just go right ahead and just have this meeting.
Good afternoon. I'm Jana Herrera, and I live up in North Fort Worth. I am a regional sales manager for a consumer products company, and I am involved in our community. Happy to be part of this group. Thank you.
Kent Bradshaw, representing District 9. I'm a community member and working on starting a farm, Funky Town Farms.
Hi, I'm Linda Kennedy, and I'm representing District 6. I was part of the original task force, and I am just a community volunteer.
Good afternoon. Tony DeVito, representing District 7, a returning task force member.
I'm Bill Schur, and I'm representing District 1 now. I was, District 10 before, but I'm one of the mayor's appointees and lifelong, well, almost lifelong resident of Fort Worth and a retired attorney.
Yeah, I'm Graham Norris. I'm an attorney here in town. I was a part of the original group and excited to get back to work with you all.
Hi, Osana Hermosillo, a longtime Fort Worth resident. Moved here when I was 2 months old, so I've been here a while. Former city employee. I currently work for Evolving Texas, a local civil engineering firm that's minority and female owned, and one of the mayor's new appointments. I'm pleased to serve here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Whitney Boyd, and I work here at in higher education, and I've been in Fort Worth since 2014.
And again, I'm Sal Espino, the chairman. I'm an attorney. I served on the city council from 2005 to 2017, representing District 2 on the north side. Mr. Williams was also a council member in the 80s and did an outstanding job as a council member. And all of you, I want to thank you for taking this role. It's a significant responsibility. Redistricting happens every 10 years after the census. And what we do as a task force, ultimately coming up with a recommendation to the city council, is of tremendous significance because these will be the boundaries from which citizens get to elect their representatives for this great city of Fort Worth that continues to grow. So we don't take that responsibility lightly. And I will say, as we go forward this process, remember, not only do we have to come up with a map that's legal, but I think we also need to come up with a map that is fair and equitable to all the citizens of Fort Worth. So with that, we'll get started, and wanted to have staff give a presentation about the census data, some of you, and population trends. Some of you were at the joint meeting with the city council and saw that, but I want to do that again because I think it's important to see the population trends in our city. So with that, we'll start with Mr. Mark McAvoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and task force members. It's a pleasure to be back with you this afternoon to present some additional census summary information. Some of you may have seen this before. This was largely pulled from a presentation that we delivered to City Council earlier in the year after the 2020 census counts were delivered. But what how this differs from the presentation that we made at the joint meeting is that it goes into more detail at the district level under the currently constituted council districts to let you see how some of the growth has happened in those respective districts. So a couple of things that I'll say at the outset before we get started. The two themes that you will see in each district is growth and aging. What I mean by that, all districts have grown, which you'll see, and all districts' voting age population has outpaced the growth in the district. So you'll see that as a recurring theme as we go through. And in addition to the numbers, the counts, you'll see some maps that kind of help summarize concentrations of population and voting age concentrations as well. If at any point during the presentation you have a question, you need something clarified, or we need to go back and relook at something, just let me know and we'll be happy to do that. And I'm going to try to get through this as expeditiously as we can so we can maximize the remaining time on our schedule. As everybody probably knows, the 2020 census count was 918,915. The reason that this is important is because this is the number on which you're going to base the redistricting, or the new districts that you're going to be recommending to city council in the map that you're going to ultimately recommend to them. As we look at the city as a whole, just to kind of set the stage, this is information that you did see at the joint meeting, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because, again, we're going to go through this district by district, but you can see there that we had a total population growth of 24% between 2010 and 2020, and then, as you can see there, the voting age population grew at a faster pace than the total population. And what that looks like with respect to race and ethnicity at the city level, we have a total population that is broken down pretty equally between whites and Hispanics or Latinos, blacks at 19%, Asians at 5%, and then all others counted at 4%. And if you remember that presentation, if you looked back at 1990 and progressed it through 2020, those numbers were changing. In other words, the city is getting more diverse as it grows, and that trend has happened for the last 4 census that we've undertaken. And so if we look at the populations by district, if you start in District 2 and go down, you'll see that the changes have all been positive, most in double digits. By far the fastest growing district at this particular census count is District 7, that grew by 76% and now is totaling approximately 160,000 people in the district boundary. And District 9, although it grew by the lowest amount at 4% at 99,995 population.
Can you point to, go back to that prior slide, can you point or show where District 7 is so the public and the task force members can see where District 7 boundaries currently are?
Absolutely. So in current boundaries, you see it kind of coming and snaking. It's a very meandering district that covers a lot of territory from north to central, and as I said, was the fastest growing by percent change between 2010 and 2020.
Thank you.
So, and again, this is citywide. If you look, here's population density, and this probably doesn't surprise anyone. You see where the deeper the violet shade or the purple shade, the more densely packed the population is. And so you see those densely packed areas scattered around town in areas that probably don't surprise you. We have a lot of floodplain in town, obviously, and when you see areas that reflect a 0 population density, it is likely that it's the river, a tributary, or the floodplain. That's why you see areas where you have that 0 population density. As we look at voting age population and the change, again, we're comparing 2010 to 2020. You can see areas where the voting age per square mile, and again, this is concentration. So the deeper the blue, the more concentrated the voting age population is. And this tends to be correlated with the density overall. But like we mentioned before, and we showed with the tabular data, that the voting age population is growing at a slightly faster pace than the total population. And then when you look at the voting age population by percentage, you can see it here reflected in a different way. And again, the deeper the purple, the higher percentage of the people inside of that geographic tract, in this case, census block, that is being reflected here. All right, so before we go into the district by district comparison, you'll see here the final comparison here with race and ethnicity from 2010 to 2020. And as you can compare the two maps, you'll see that especially in that north quadrant of the city, not only are the dots getting closer together, so there are more people moving into that area, but is becoming more diverse generally. And again, that bears out over time as we've seen that trend continue between 1990 and 2020. All right, now we're getting into the individual districts and kind of looking at it from the same perspective, district by district, starting with Council District 2. You see the total population grew by 20%, and the voting age population grew by 26% over that same period of time. And you see the breakdown of the race and ethnicity there. What you'll also see as a trend here is that the other population of the 5 that are listed is the fastest growing. It is in each district still the smallest percentage of the population, but it was the fastest growing. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One of the primary reasons is that in 2020 was the first census in which people could elect more than one race and ethnicity on the questionnaire. So prior to 2020, you weren't able to do that. In 2020, you were, which helps to explain the large growth in that other population category. And so as we look at District 2, by breakdown of race and ethnicity, you see there that it is a primarily Hispanic and Latino district at 57%, 25% white, 9% black, 6 Asian, and 3 other. Again, you see that other, again, reflecting that past comment. Small slice of the donut here, but when you look at the growth, it is growing faster than the other demographics. Total population in 2020 of 115,200. Looking here, you see population density. Again, the deeper the purple, the higher the concentration of residents. And this is by census block, which is the lowest common denominator of the reporting data. Voting age population, again, this closely matches, but if you'll recall, the voting age population is growing faster than total. And then voting age population as a percentage, where you can see the areas with the highest percentage or the relative percentage of voting age population. And then race and ethnicity spread out and mapped. And again, I want to point out, just to make sure that everybody understands that when you're looking at these, 1 dot equals 10 people in this slide and all of the slides that are of race and ethnicity. So 1 dot equals 10 population, to help kind of cement the order of magnitude here for this particular map. Going on and looking at Council District 3, again, 20% change in total, 21% change in voting age population, and again, the other population growing at 161% clip, and you can see the others there. And you'll notice a trend here that all, in most districts, the black population, Hispanic and Latino, Asian and other, are growing faster than the white alone population. And here that distribution in Council District 3, this is a majority white district at 54%, and you can see Hispanic and Latino at 23, black at 15, Asian at 4, and other at 4. Population density. Voting age population. And then voting age population as a percentage of that geography. And just, you can see it really clearly in District 3, but as you go from a density map to a percentage map, you see the colors populate more of the map, and the reason for that is because we're dealing with geographic areas that in some cases are larger than in other cases. So if you were looking at this map, like for example, down in here, these census blocks are fairly small, right? You can kind of see the distribution of different things going on here, whereas this is essentially one census block, right? So you've got geographies of different size. And then the race and ethnicity distribution here again, and showing the change between 2010 and 2020. Moving on to District 4. This district had a lower total growth in total population, but you can see there again the voting age population outpaced that. Here is the first, as we're going from 2 to 9, the first district where we had actually a decrease in one of the demographic categories, and the white alone population decreased by 8% as the others grew by double digits, with again the other population growing at faster than 100%. The race and ethnicity breakdown, white 44, Hispanic and Latino 25, black 17, Asian 9, and other 5. Here's the population density, the voting age population, the voting age population by percentage, and then the race and ethnicity distribution between 2010 and 2020. Moving on to Council District 5, you see again the same trend, growth at double digit, voting age outpacing total growth. The demographics of black alone, Hispanic and Latino, Asian alone, and other outpacing white alone population growth, with other population growing at over 100%. This is a majority black district at 38%, with Hispanic and Latino at 33%, white alone at 19%, Asian at 6 and 4.
Mark, can I correct you? It's a plurality, right? Majority is 50% or more, right? It's plurality, right?
Plurality is a better
I'm sorry,
term. Thank you for correcting.
in redistricting, you have to be careful with the terms. So it's plurality.
Correct. That is absolutely correct. So a plurality where the black population is 38, Hispanic and Latino 33, and on around, as we described.
Stat classes.
Yeah, there you go. No, that's an important distinction, though, so thanks for pointing that out. And as we look through the maps on District 5, you'll see here that among the districts, this one has a lot of territory where you see those lower population density numbers right there in the middle going out to the east there. But again, population density, voting age population, and then that same figure as a percentage. And then race and ethnicity between 2010 and 2020. Council District 6, again, you see the growth happening, total growth. Here again, we have a district where we have a decrease in one of the demographic categories, with the others growing at double-digit percentages, with other growing at over 100%. So this is a theme. And is the term plurality? All right. So we have a district here where we have a population of white alone at 34, black at 29, Hispanic or Latino 27, Asian 5, and other 5.
And there, if you combine the Latino and black population, you can say it's a majority-minority district.
Minority, yes.
Those are hard in redistricting.
Population density, voting age population, and then voting age population by percentage. And then again, race and ethnicity. This is repetitive, but we're going district by district to give you a better sense of what's happening in the districts as they're currently constituted. Here is District 7, where we had the largest growth at 76%. And you can see there that all of the demographic categories are growing by significant percentages, with the other population almost tripling between 2010 and 2020. And the Asian population doubling, and the black alone population almost doubling. And here you see the donut again with the white alone population at 58, Hispanic or Latino at 20, black at 10, Asian at 6, and other at 6. Population density, this is where you see that you've got a whole lot of folks in a fairly compact area as you look at that district. And again, to point out the chair's request earlier, this goes around and has a fairly wide territorial boundary here that encompasses a lot of territory. voting age population, and then voting age population by percentage, and race and ethnicity distribution. District 8, same trend. Total population was outpaced by a handful in voting age population, and then the others are growing with other in District 8, not quite hitting 100%, but close. And here you have the demographics for race and ethnicity: Hispanic and Latino at 48%, Black at 33%, white alone at 13%, Asian at 3%, and other at 3%. Here's the population density for District 8, the voting age population, and the voting age population by percentage, and then finally the race and ethnicity distribution throughout the district. And then finally, Council District 9. Again, Council District 9 is the district that it still grew. It grew by 4%, but it grew by the lowest percentage of all the districts, and the voting age population grew by a factor of 3 over the total. And this is the only district where a minority demographic reduced in population. The Hispanic or Latino population fell by 2%. And again, the other population grew by over 100% in this district. And so you have a majority Hispanic or Latino district at 52%, even though the total population of that demographic fell by 2%. White alone at 35%, Black at 7%, Asian at 3%, and other at 3%. Population density. This is the smallest district by geography, and so you've got a lot of concentration in this district, as you can see. Voting age population. Voting age population by percentage, and then race and ethnicity distribution, showing the change between 2010 and 2020. One other thing that I would like to show you before we take questions is the projected growth looking out into the future. And this is a heat map that essentially takes the North Central Texas Council of Governments population projections that they make at a region-wide level, looking at specifically the Fort Worth data. So this is City of Fort Worth data coming from NCT COG's population projections, looking out to 2045. And you can see that we're using the 2020 census count and then adding the population projections from the COG between 2025 and 2045. And so you see those areas of higher growth that is projected in this area north of Saginaw, kind of wrapping around Hazlet there, right in the middle, and then in the southern tips that come down off of 35. And so as the projection goes, this is where the projection continues to see the heaviest growth. Now, that doesn't mean that these other areas aren't growing. In some cases, there's some significant growth here and in other areas. But the heaviest concentration of growth projected is in the areas of yellow, as you can see from the legend in the top right corner, with a total projected population in 2045 of 1.4 million. And so that concludes the presentation of the census summary, but I'll be happy to field any questions that you may have.
Do any task force members have any questions of Mark regarding the census data? Mr. Scher, turn on your mic, please.
Yes, I was just wondering if we have any charts or information that would show the minority voting age population for the various districts. So we have the total population shown by minority groups, but we don't have voting age. And I know that one of our presenters I think several times at our earlier meetings, commented that the minority voting age population was really a key metric because of the different voting percentages of different ethnic groups.
Right, so we are able to provide that data to you, and we'll be happy to do that. We do not have slides reflecting the voting age population of each demographic category, but we can certainly provide that to the task force and put it on our website, on our redistricting page as well.
Great, thanks.
Good point Mr. Scher has made. I think that the maps, the redistricting software and the analysis that has been done by staff on the maps does have the voting age population on there
That's
for
correct.
the maps. But this is the point, Mr. Scher makes a very good point. And legal will come, I don't want to steal legal's thunder, but there are instances when you use total population, and then for purposes of creating a minority opportunity district, you look at voting age population. I'll let Ms. Guzman explain that later, but that's a very good point that Mr. Scher brought up about voting age population versus total population. Thank you, Mark. Any other questions that task force may have about the census data or questions to Mark? Anyone? All right, thank you, Mark. I guess now we move on to the redistricting criteria. So Fernando, if you can give us an overview, and then we'll have Ms. Guzman and then Ms. Swindle. So Fernando's gonna give us an overview, and then Leann's gonna give us a legal, and then Ms. Swindle's gonna talk about communities of interest.
Pardon me, why,
Williams?
yeah, why are you doing that? Mr. Bradshaw? What was your dad's name? Okay, it wasn't the Bradshaw that served on the city council. Okay, yeah, because I served with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The city council has given this task force a big responsibility to recommend an initial map for redistricting, and all of your work will revolve around applying a set of 10 redistricting criteria, which were recommended by the original task force last March and adopted by the council in April of this year. And several of you have raised questions about how we should apply these criteria. In certain cases, as the chairman has already indicated, there are certain nuances associated with the criteria that are important for us to explain. And so, thank you very much, Joe. We'd like to provide you with an initial overview of all 10 criteria, and then afterwards, we'd like to bring forward Leann Guzman from our law department to talk with us about certain criteria that are associated with the legal precedent, the legal compliance criterion, and the criterion about minority opportunity districts. Some of you have also raised questions about communities of interest and the extent to which we can keep them intact, and how that activity may or may not affect minority voting rights. And so we'd like to bring forward Michelle Swindle to talk with us about communities of interest and how we can calculate the numbers of those communities that may be kept intact or may be split by district boundaries. So if we may, I'd like to remind you, we did discuss these 10 criteria again at the recent joint work session between the task force and the city council. But I think it bears a reminder. The first 5 of the 10 criteria are classified as high priority criteria. So you would give them generally greater weight than you would to the latter 5, but all 10 are important. The first criterion is that the districts be of approximately equal size. That is fundamentally important, and that is to say that the population of the largest district should not exceed the population of the smallest district by more than 10%. So as a rule of thumb, you would probably want to look at the average of each district, which would be 91,800. Remember, the overall population from the 2020 census is 918,000. So divided by 10, 91,800, that would be the average size. So a district could be as large in population as 5% more, or as small as 5% less. Generally speaking, and this is another reason why Mr. McAvoy's presentation is so important, the faster growing districts, like the districts in far north Fort Worth, the faster growing districts, you probably want to set below the average, because you know that by the end of the next decade, they're going to be well above the average. In fact, probably well above the range that we established. And so you want to set the fast-growing districts low, below the average, and the slower-growing districts, they're all growing, but not at the same rate. The slower-growing districts you want to set above the average. So bear in mind the projections from the Council of Governments that Mr. McAvoy gave to us. And so we determined, when you look at the data pages, that the tables that assess the extent to which each proposed map meets fully or meets partially each of the criteria, the standard is if there is a deviation between the highest population and the lowest population of less than 9,189, which is that 10%. If the deviation is less than that, then we would classify that criterion as being fully met by that proposed map. So there's a standard that we use for each criterion to determine whether it's been fully met or partially met. Now, you're not obligated by any means to determine that a certain map is superior to another map merely because it meets more criteria than another. There may be compelling reasons to choose a map even though it doesn't quite meet the same number of criteria as a first map. But as a rule of thumb, you want to give greater weight to those maps that meet the criteria to a greater degree. I think that stands to reason. But you have some degree of latitude, and as the chairman indicated at the outset, we're here to select not just the map that is most legally defensible, but the map that is most fair and most equitable for the population of Fort Worth as a whole. So, any questions about the first criterion, equal size? Yes, ma'am, Ms. Kennedy.
Not a question, but just a clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
The one person vote based on the total population for this one it's based on total population.
Total population.
Not voter population.
Exactly right. Exactly right. In respect to most of the criteria that we're going to be discussing, we're focused on total population. Voting age population only has limited application, but when we start talking about communities of interest or minority opportunity districts, you'll see a greater emphasis being placed upon voting age population. And Ms. Guzman will explain that to us in a moment. Thank you for that question. This is total population. I'll just mention briefly these second and third criteria. The second is compliance with the U.S. Constitution, Voting Rights Act, Texas Constitution, and other applicable laws. Ms. Guzman will talk with us about cracking and packing, retrogression, and how this criterion will require review by outside counsel with respect to each of the maps. The outside counsel is from the law firm of Bickerstaff, and I believe they're joining us by WebEx from the Austin office. So they're available to participate. If you have any questions for our outside counsel, they're on hand to respond. The third criterion is minority opportunity districts, intended to create opportunities for fair representation. This criterion also requires review by outside counsel and by a forensic political scientist. I've never known anyone who describes him or herself as a forensic political scientist, but I take their word for it that such a person exists. And they track trends in how citizens vote with respect to age, race, ethnicity, and other demographic factors. And Ms. Guzman will explain why that issue is relevant. The fourth criterion, which Ms. Swindle will discuss with us further, is communities of interest. And here we're trying to minimize, among other things, minimize the percentage of these communities of interest, neighborhoods and groups of neighborhoods that want to stay together in a single council district, minimize the percentage of those that are split or divided by council district lines in any proposed map. And so if fewer than 25% are divided, we consider that criterion to be fully met. Now, that's a low bar. You could say we ought to seek to minimize that percentage as much as possible. If it's less than 50% divided, then we treat that as partially met. There is a question which I believe Mr. Schur may have raised, and may want to lead that discussion in a moment, about whether all communities of interest should be treated as equally important to contain within a single council district as those splits may pertain to minority voting rates. And so we can talk about that a little more in just a moment. So those are the shaded criteria, the ones that I think will warrant your discussion the most this afternoon. Criteria number 5, I think, speaks for itself: contiguous territory. We don't want council districts to consist of fragments. And then we go to the lower priority criteria. Compactness. This is actually one of the criteria that's most difficult to meet. The original task force recommended the application of what is known as the Polsby-Popper ratio. It's a way of calculating compactness. You may recall that there are multiple ways mathematically to calculate compactness, and we finally settled on the Polsby-Popper ratio as the best measure. And if the ratio is greater than or equal to 0.05, then it will have met the criterion. It is difficult to reach, particularly in the western and southwestern parts of Fort Worth, where the city limit lines are highly irregular. And so you may find some very good maps that meet all the criteria, but just barely fail to meet the compactness criterion. I don't think that should disqualify the map by any means. Just bear in mind that this criterion is very difficult to meet. It's intended to prevent gerrymandering, of course, but in some cases it's very hard to get around irregular district lines simply because the city limit lines are irregular. So that's compactness. Identifiable geographic boundaries, streams, railroad tracks, highways, and so forth, make it easy to recognize the boundaries of each council district. Containing whole voting precincts, those data are not yet available, so that we're not able to assess the maps. Actually, it's a case of you could say it's a case of the tail wagging the dog, because the voting precincts can be drawn on the basis of whatever boundaries the task force recommends. So that is not likely to be a significant factor. We want to contain whole census blocks or block groups within single districts. And if fewer than 25% of those census block groups are divided, then we would consider that criterion to have been met fully. And finally, we are not to consider the place of residence of incumbents or potential candidates in applying the criteria and delineating the council districts. We have not evaluated that criterion because it's practically impossible we can draw our own interpretations, but it's practically impossible to prove objectively that the author of a map has or has not considered place of residence. So those are the 10 criteria in general. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, but otherwise I would like to ask you to focus on criteria 2, 3, and 4, and I'd like to bring forward Leann Guzman to talk with us about 2 and 3.
Any questions for Fernando before Ms. Guzman takes the podium? Okay, Ms. Guzman.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good afternoon. So because our outside counsel is here, and I want to be cognizant of the time, I'm going to punt to him pretty early. I thought it would be helpful for you all to hear from our law firm of Bickerstaff what they do when they go through these maps for legal compliance. Because that's the question, of course, that we get the most often is regarding the minority populations, minority opportunity districts, et cetera. And so before I go into a lot of other things, I'm just going to introduce Philip Arnold. Philip, I don't know if you're planning to turn your camera on. It might be helpful if we could see your face. There you are. Okay. And I'm going to let him just kind of give a brief overview of their process. And of course, he'll also be available to answer any questions as well. One thing that I did want to point out is that what Fernando said about the latitude is absolutely 100% accurate. But I do want to point out that it is important to look at all the criteria. As I've said, some of you have heard it, probably feels a little bit like I'm a broken record. Race cannot be the predominant factor for why you choose one map over another. It obviously is a factor, but that's why we look at all of the criteria. You're looking at the compactness, you're looking at the communities of interest, you're looking at more than just one thing when you're looking at the map. Not to say that the racial makeup of a district is unimportant, but it is one of multiple criteria that you'll be looking at as you look at the maps. So I will now ask Philip Arnold to go over their process as they have reviewed. For example, they reviewed multiple maps from City Council when they submitted maps for their selection to be presented to you. And then as the process goes along and you all begin to whittle down maps, preferably down to just a handful or less, then we will have outside counsel begin to look at those maps as well for legality. Right now, the number of maps are too great. It would not be cost efficient to have them review every single one with the depth at which they look at these. But as you begin to narrow it down, we will start having them be engaged in the process. So Philip?
Yeah,
Hold on,
Guzman,
Mr. Williams has a
let
question.
me ask you this. I was, looking at television the other night, and I was looking at the situation in regards to the Riverside situation, whereas they were talking about the fact that they've been trying to get their community put together rather than having their community divided in 3 different city council districts. And they were very concerned about maybe this would be the time when they could possibly get their district or their community in one district rather than having their community divided into 3 districts. What are any comments about that?
Yes, I think that would fall under the communities of interest, and we might could talk about that a little bit later during the communities of interest presentation, but that's exactly the kind of thing that y'all are going to be looking at as you go through these maps, because those neighborhoods have made it very clear, not just Riverside, but others as well. We do not want to be split. We want to be together. So those are exactly the kind of things. You'll weigh one map against another as you go through the process.
Okay.
So you're exactly right.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Oh, and let me say one note about Philip. He is living in Austin right now, but he grew up in Fort Worth. So we can all give him a kudos for that, even though he wasn't entirely responsible for that. But, all right, thank you, Philip.
Go ahead, Philip.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't responsible for growing up in Fort Worth, but I'm happy I did. Thank you all for having me. And just to follow up on what Ms. Guzman said, well, a lot of what we look for when we're looking at a map, the basic goal is to put the districts in balance. That is the primary goal, and to comply with the one person, one vote under the United States Constitution. And then while you do that, in that process, The other goal is to not violate the Voting Rights Act, obviously. And there can be a little bit of a push and pull between complying with the Constitution and complying with the Voting Rights Act, because the Voting Rights Act says that you should not discriminate against minorities. And then the Constitution has been interpreted to mean that you should not use race as an overriding factor while complying with the Voting Rights Act. So, as Leann said, really the key is to use the criteria. That's what the criteria are there for. They're there to guide you along the process so that you don't use race as an overriding factor in drawing the districts. And that doesn't mean you can't use it as a factor, but you just don't want to base everything on it. And typically it's pretty obvious when you do use race as an overriding factor, because you go through the criteria, you'll see compactness, and it is one of the criteria. And as someone said before, that's difficult to measure in a mathematical ratio because the city is not a circle, and the circle is the most compact shape you can have. And so the city has weird edges. But when you look at a map, there is kind of a visual test you can look at to say, well, this map looks weird. This district looks weird. This district is oddly shaped. And sometimes districts have to be oddly shaped, again, because of geography, because a city may annex an area that is not necessarily touched the city, and they're only connected by a road. And so you may have some kind of little spur sticking off of a district. That can't be avoided, and that's going to upset any mathematical analysis of compactness. And so you can look at, well, that looks like a funny shape, but then as you dig deeper into it, you realize that it has to be a funny shape because there's no way you could draw it without it. But generally speaking, you want to use identifiable boundaries and roads, rivers, creeks, things like that as your boundaries. That is as much to keep the population compact, to keep the districts compact, as it is because those boundaries typically, not always, but typically divide communities of interest. So you may have an interstate that divides two particular neighborhoods or a busy street or the Trinity River or whatever it may be. So it's good to use those boundaries for that reason. It's also good for the citizens to know where they live, because if they know that Camp Bowie is the dividing line between two districts, it makes sense to them, and it's easy for them to understand why that was done. Whereas if you have two people on a residential street who live across from each other, and one side is in one district and one side's in another, they don't really understand why they're divided like that. Do you have to do that? Sometimes you do. Sometimes you do in order to put the population in balance. It's not always possible to use the major roads and rivers as your dividing line. Sometimes you have to do things like split an election precinct or even split a census block in order to just make the basic math work. But there is definitely some discretion in there as to what is a neighborhood, what is a community of interest. And those are important things to identify, that it really having a diverse group of people like you and city council who know your district and your area well and know the city well. And as someone brought up a Riverside neighborhood, and combining them into one district, that can definitely be a factor. If that's something you want to do, then focus on that. See if you can balance the districts while doing that, and at the same time not drawing a crazy shape. At the same time, not discriminating against minorities, or the inverse of that, which would be focusing too much on race and minority status. So it is a delicate balance, and not always easy to do. I can say of the maps I've looked at, they've all been very good maps. I've been very impressed by how well drawn they have been, and quite frankly, the level of detail from the first PowerPoint presentation, the analysis and the statistics that the city has in-house is impressive. So I think you all have the resources there to do it.
Any questions for Mr. Arnold? Yes, Ms. Boyd, and then I'll come to Mr. Scher.
So the question, I I hear you all say, don't use race as a main factor. I'm trying to understand in comparison to the current lines that we have and I guess the previous guidelines, what has shifted? Because I'm even thinking about like the shape of some districts now that from my eyes look like crazy shapes. But can you walk me through what has shifted in the last 10 years that would change? Because even like looking at the population and the racial breakdown from 10 years ago versus now, I'm trying to figure out how do we, it
Well,
sounds like a balancing act, but I don't.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely going to be a balancing act. I mean, I think, to your point, and I think one thing that we've discovered with the data that goes to the criteria regarding minority opportunity districts, when we created that criteria, we used 50% as kind of a rule of thumb. But now that I've seen the data, it's very interesting because we have districts 5, 6, and 8 that have all elected an African-American council member, and they did that with a voting age population of African-Americans in those districts at 38.56%, 28.07%, and 34.30% respectively. So the 50% is not necessarily a perfect indicator that that's what's required in order to get the voting power for the minorities that you need. So I think that, in terms of what's changed, I'm not sure that comparing 2010 to 2020 is what we're going to do so much as just looking at what's on the ground today. Looking at that data point, I know that Mark said that he would get you all the minority voting age population distribution. I think that's going to be very helpful for you to see as well. But that's really what we're going to do is just take a look at what's happening today. And that's, to me, a good indicator that, and I think Philip can back that up, and the many other cities that he's worked with as well, that you, particularly with the African-American population, you don't always have to have the high percentages. With Hispanic districts, it's different because they don't always vote cohesively. So that can be a challenge as well. And I don't know, Philip, do you want to speak to that? I know you've seen that in some of the other cities you've mentioned that you've worked with.
Yes, it's very true. That you don't need a over 50% margin in order to for a minority group to elect a candidate of their choosing. That is because, as Leann said, African Americans tend to vote more cohesively. They tend to be more geographically compact and live in neighborhoods, and they tend to have higher voter registration rates. So when you look at even citizen and voting age population data, you can look too at voter registration rates to help you determine, well, there's a lot of people who live here who may be Hispanic or African American or Asian, but do they vote? Do they vote for the same candidate? You can go a little too far down that rabbit hole in redistricting because it's very difficult to say in a broad swath that African Americans always vote together. Hispanics sometimes do or sometimes don't, or you're making generalizations. So you really have to go back into the data and have a forensic political scientist who analyzes that data, analyzes the history of voting in order to look at it. That is a very detailed and complicated thing to do. There's a lot of opinion in it. So I think it's easier to step back and look and say, what do we have right now? Fort Worth has 8 districts, you're moving to 10. So right there, you're different than pretty much any city in the state right now, because there's very few who are adding districts, that your districts are going to look different now moving forward than they do now. I mean, that's just a fact because you're adding 2. So you're going to have smaller districts overall than you have now. But do they still perform the same way? So if you have 3 African-American districts who are electing, or 3 districts that are electing African-American council members with, 30 to 40% African-American voting age population within that district, what does that tell you? I mean, they may be cobbling together a coalition of Hispanic voters or white voters or any other kind of coalition. It may be because the African Americans are the ones really turning out for the elections. There's a lot of factors that can go into it. So as you move forward, I think it's important to look and see what you have now, and then can you recreate what you have now? While not, what you don't want to do is necessarily, I think y'all have heard about packing and cracking before. So you don't want to divide the groups amongst so many districts that can't elect somebody. You don't want to pack them all together so they're overrepresented in one district. But look and see what you have now. And if, there's 3 performing African American districts, 3 districts that are electing African American council members, and 1 or 2 that are electing Hispanic, can you keep that ratio roughly the same as you draw? And I think pretty much every map I've seen does something like that.
Mr. Scher, and then I'll go to the next one. Mr. Scher?
Yes, I had a question that relates both to the cracking question and to communities of interest. And I'm thinking about a situation in which there is a very distinct minority community of interest I think everybody at the table would recognize as a community of interest. And it is surrounded by predominantly white neighborhoods. This community of interest would like to stay together. If a map divides that, and that community of interest will never be large enough to form or be joined with other minorities to be a majority-minority district. So the question that I have is this: if that particular community were to be split in half, would that constitute potentially cracking? Because it's a substantial population block, but it's never enough to by itself elect anyone, but it could be a swing kind of a thing. Would that be cracking?
Probably not. Probably not if you're talking population, let's say 5%, something like that, that could swing an election one way or another. I mean, I think it's debatable. You can never say whether or not you're going to, get sued because you did something, or even if you do, if you're going to win. But generally speaking, the first threshold to a Section 2 lawsuit is that there has to be a population, a minority population that makes up a majority of the district, so 50.01%, over 50% of voting age population. And then beyond that, you have to show that that community votes together, they vote cohesively. And finally, the third factor is that you have to show that there is a majority, typically a white majority, who consistently votes against that community of interest candidate. So I don't think you could show that with a 5 or 10% minority group.
Okay, so the second half of the question is, that would not disqualify a map dividing this, but as a prudential factor, we could support keeping that group together and prefer one map over another to keep that community of interest together. Is that?
Yes, it's one of your criteria. So it's definitely something you want to look at. And the reason it's one of your criteria is because it's race neutral. You can define a community of interest by race, but you could also define a community of interest by an attendance zone for an elementary school or any other factor you want to use. Community of interest isn't necessarily a well-defined thing. I think we all have an idea of what a neighborhood is and what a community of interest is. So I think you look at it and you say, can we keep this group together, considering all the other things we're trying to do? And if you can, then I think you do it. And if you can't for some reason, then you have to, make that as a tick against that plan and say, well, that's maybe a plan that we don't like as much because it divides this community. Maybe we will like one a little more.
Great, that answers my question. Thank you.
Mr. Norris?
Yeah, can y'all talk a little bit about retrogression? I feel like we've talked about packing and cracking a lot, and it may be kind of what Philip was talking about a minute ago with the performing districts, and So just get into that a little bit if you can.
Yeah, I'll jump in here before Philip starts in. But so retrogression is not a legal requirement, of course. I mean, you were here when we had that whole discussion in the first round of task force meetings. But it is something that you all chose to put into the criteria as a goal. So, and I'll let Philip talk about the mechanics of what that looks like. But I just wanted to make sure and remind those of you who were here, and then let those of you that are new know that that's not an actual legal requirement. Yes, ma'am.
I have my notes from the first time on that, and it says, we currently have 5 minority opportunity districts, 2, 5, 6, 8, and 9. So we can't have fewer than 5 going forward, which is 62.5% of our districts. And with a growth to 10 districts, that would mean we would have to grow to a minimum of 6 minority opportunity districts to be compliant with our own idea of no retrogression.
And Philip, I don't know if you can speak to that, because I'll let Philip say whether or not that's accurate. Did you hear that? Were you able to hear?
I did. It is a difficult question to answer. And I get the ratio you're using of the 5/8 and the 6/10, and that is definitely one way to look at it. The first question is that even possible? Can you draw 6 minority districts? And if you can, what do they look like? As we said, there are African-American or districts electing African-American candidates with much less than a 50% majority African-American population. Would they do the exact same thing under a different system, under a different district with different district lines? That's really impossible to say, but I think you can try, and it's definitely a goal. But to some extent, it's a judgment call. You may have a district that has 55% Hispanic population, but then of total population, but then that'll shrink by voting age population. But maybe let's say it's 55% of voting age population, it may shrink too because of citizenship. And not as many Hispanics are citizens as African Americans, and that's just a statistical thing. But it's also not always true in every neighborhood in every city. So what does your citizenship data show you? We don't really have citizenship data yet for the 2020 census, so to some extent that's a bit of a guess, but you can presume that it's going to be something less than the total voting age population. And then it's probably going to be less based on voter registration, just because statistically Hispanics have a lower voter registration than an African-American community does. So an African-American community may be able to elect an African-American council member with 35% of the district population, whereas a Hispanic community may not with 55%.
Any other questions? Mr. Williams?
Yes, let me ask, and I don't mean no harm, please understand me. When I was on the council for 10 years, we did a lot of annexing of property. What effect in the last 10 years have we annexed property and people that has a lot to do with the growth of the numbers that we have that's now in this survey?
Yeah, I can't speak to exact numbers. I don't know if you know that, Mark, but I do think it's certainly had an impact. You can see that our city's grown. It's grown west and it's grown north, northwest, and it will continue to do so under particular development agreements in the western border in Parker County. So that will continue to grow, and that is something that we've talked about on occasion in these meetings, is that as you look at the population balance, you do need to keep it within that 10% difference, but when you're looking at those districts that we know, especially west in Parker County, there's residential developments that are going to be coming in. You're going to have a population explosion in the west over the next 10 years. You'll want to make that population and those districts to the west a little bit less. Again, meeting your 10% threshold either way, but make those a little bit light on your population because you know that they will grow over the next 10 years.
Yes, because in working with Ross Perot Jr. and getting Alliance Airport in that area up there, it's very interesting to see exactly how that property grew and how the numbers grew and how, when you look at the maps, you can look at the north and you can look up there toward Alliance Airport in that area, and you can see that there's a lot of growth and a lot of numbers. So I'm just trying to figure out in my mind exactly how we're going to really deal with that to the extent that we know we're going to have 10 districts. And we also know the population that's up there. And I still want to make sure that we have a fair and equal deal when we draw these maps. Because I'm just concerned about how are we going to really look at those things, and these terms that we're throwing around here now, all of those play into whether we do a great job, and I'm saying a great job, in drawing these maps, in essence, to making sure that we do it fair and equally to all of our citizens.
And if I can follow up to Mr. Williams's point, the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, which required pre-clearance, the Supreme Court said we didn't need any more, but there's still Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Can council speak about the dilution, what dilution means under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and how that may apply or may not apply to redistricting? Arnold.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was waiting for my turn. So I guess in what reference are you using?
All right, so as the city has continued to grow, right, Mr. Williams talked about annexations. Fort Worth, prior councils and current councils have decided that the area around Fort Worth was gonna grow. So the public policy was to annex to try to control that growth or at least benefit from that growth, so Fort Worth wouldn't be landlocked. What happened in Dallas, it got landlocked and all these cities sprung out around it. Policyholders in Fort Worth thought that it made sense to enter development agreements and at least have this annexation policy. So dilution would mean that if you added more residents and there wasn't much diversity in those new residents, that would dilute the populations of the, I guess, I don't like the term minority, but that's the term that the law uses, right? So that would dilute, the population of Fort Worth. I guess where I'm getting at is where we are right now, Ms. Boyd's point, traditionally you've had districts 5 and 8 that the communities there have elected African-Americans to the council. Now you have District 6, so you have 3 African-Americans on the council. District 2 traditionally has been an opportunity district where Hispanics have elected a candidate of their choice. You can make an argument whether District 9 is a true minority opportunity district or not. And again, it's not the ethnicity or race of the candidate, it's the opportunity of that community to elect a candidate of their choice. So I'm talking about, let's say we do all this, but then we do dilute some of these communities of interest and also the minority communities. Would the city, in terms of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, dilution, how does that come into play?
So dilution through annexation?
Or dilution to throwing council maps that make less meaningful the opportunity to have as much minority opportunity districts as possible.
Okay. Then, yeah, I think that's really getting into cracking. And that's really where that would come into play. So as you may know, if you've drawn any districts, or as you will learn when you start to draw some, that you can dilute a district even trying to make it more, let's just say Hispanic, because it's a pretty good example, because Hispanics don't necessarily live in a certain side of town. I know Fort Worth, the north side's an old Hispanic side of town, or Hispanic neighborhoods. But as time has progressed and we've gotten further away from segregation, people are more diffused throughout the city. So you may see a pocket of a Hispanic neighborhood that you want to combine with another one, but by the time you connect those two through other territory, you end up diluting what you tried to get. So your total population numbers, your percentage of Hispanic population may not increase, it may even decrease, because you've had to add so many, let's say, white voters who live in between those two Hispanic neighborhoods in order to combine them. So that is kind of I guess the way I think about dilution is not trying, accidentally diluting, right? And to me, that would kind of be a case of accidental dilution. but you'll see it. You'll know what the consequence of it is. But if the effect is to break up a minority group that is in a district right now, then you can be accused of violating Section 2, because that would be cracking. And I think dilution and cracking maybe in this situation are kind of the same, if I understand it right.
I think you've answered my question very thoroughly. Thank you. Ms. Boyd?
Yeah, so I wanted to go back to my original question. So it was really less about 2010 and trying to understand, how do we uphold number 3 on the criteria without upholding number 2? Because if we don't have the consideration and the focus on race, I feel like the disenfranchising of voters happens without having that as a primary thing that we look at. And then I also would caution to think about, I know we name like District 6, for instance, has a Black person who is our council person now, but I think the same for 9, like even though they're there now, I think we still have to really look at it if it's going to be named an opportunity district, because specifically District 6 happened this time, but I don't know that it's a true, as it stands now, opportunity district for a person of color to be elected without, again, looking at criteria number 2.
Well, I think it's not saying that you won't look at that criteria. I don't want to
Right.
give that impression at all. You definitely are. And you definitely are going to consider race as you go forward. What we're just cautioning you on is to not look at a map and say, this is it because, and then give a reason related to race. And really, there's protections built in to keep you from doing that by having all of these criteria. Staff will have already has already looked at all of the maps they're going to present to you today, and they will tell you to the extent to which they meet those other criteria. That's why we keep saying, you want to look at all the criteria, because that helps to protect you against an accusation that you only looked at race when you chose this map. You've got some protections built in there, so don't feel like you can't look at it at all. You definitely will be, but just don't make that your predominant reason.
All right. Any other questions of legal counsel, both Ms. Guzman and Mr. Arnold? All right, let's move on to communities of interest. And then what I'm going to do after communities of interest, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break as we start looking at maps, okay? So.
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Swindle, for those of you who we've not officially met. Sorry, I thought I closed all these. The communities of interest, the city has over 300 neighborhoods that are registered either as HOAs or neighborhood organizations. Of them, we have 100 that are the adjusted communities of interest. So this is the map viewer that I sent out late last night. And at the bottom, you'll see items for the neighborhood organization, the communities of interest adjusted, and the communities of interest original. So the communities, yes. So the communities of interest original are the original boundaries that the community self-identified and said, this is who we are, this is our limits. And they submitted that paperwork online through the city's website. City staff took them in, processed them, and said, all right, this is how they've self-identified. A number of them overlapped. So a neighborhood, as well as a alliance, as well as a greater alliance, all claimed this one house under their group. So city staff merged a lot of those that were coincident and said, okay, if the greatest alliance all claimed this one, here's your adjusted community of interest. So some of them are quite large, showing specifically, let me turn off neighborhood organization. So this one in Northwest Fort Worth is the Northwest Fort Worth Neighborhood Alliance, which is quite large, as well as the East Fort Worth neighborhoods. So you can see the adjusted boundary as well as what the original intent was as well as where the actual neighborhoods are. So as we were going through and training citizens on how to draw these maps, we said, yes, we're going to grade you on the communities of interest, but to look at what the neighborhood itself and the original ask of the community and say, all right, find your common ground between them. Because obviously the East Fort Worth Neighborhood Alliance has to be divided just because of its shape and location. So if you're going to divide it, where are you going to draw those lines? So.
Can we get a look at the north?
And when you get a chance, can you show the boundaries of the Riverside Alliance and the neighborhoods in the Riverside Alliance? And I pretty much know that they're divided among council districts 2, 4, and 8, and I know which neighborhoods are in districts 2, 4, and 8, but if you could show the public and the task force after this.
Yep. So these are the communities of interest up north. Riverside runs.
And for the public watching, Riverside, for those of you not from Fort Worth, it's east of 35, and it goes all the way up to Haltom City. It then, I guess up north near the Mercantile area. Then it comes down south past 121. It goes all the way down to, I would say, Beach, and 121 has the United Riverside neighborhood, and then I'll let her give you all the other neighborhoods. I don't want to steal her thunder, but I have these neighborhoods memorized.
Yes, and a number of groups, when they were drawing this, they were cutting out either Bonnie Bray or the lower one.
Bonnie Bray is on the other side of 28th Street there, east of 35, and that is in Council District 4.
Yep.
And then you have Carter Riverside, that's also in Council District 4. And Carter Riverside, of course, gets its name from Carter Riverside High School, right? And then you have Oakhurst, which is in District 9 in Scenic Bluff. And then, let's see, did I get all of them? Carter Riverside, Scenic Bluff, Oakhurst, Bonnie Bray, and United Riverside. I think those are the major neighborhoods. There was at one time a neighborhood called Gateway Neighborhood Association, but I don't know if it's still out there.
I think it might be.
When I was on council from 2005 to 2011, I represented parts of Riverside because, as Mr. Herron will show you later, and as Mr. Williams alluded to, Riverside, because of the way where it is located and also demographically, has been split between 3 council districts because you got to comply with the Voting Rights Act. And so Riverside is one of those wonderful, diverse neighborhoods. It has everything, right? It has, African Americans, Anglos, Asians, Hispanics, and that's the challenge, right? But now with smaller districts, more compact districts, hopefully, you may be able to keep it together. So anyway, keep going.
So as you mentioned, this is the limits of the community of interest for Riverside. And yes, it is divided by a number of major thoroughfares. Since we're talking about communities of interest that wanted to stay intact, Central Meadowbrook also asked the council to make sure that they stayed intact as well, because they are traditionally divided.
And then let me throw out just a question, no answer, this is just rhetorical for the task force to consider as me forward. Council District 9 is also very diverse, but are the neighborhoods around TCU the same communities of interest as the neighborhoods along the Hempfield Quarter? For example, let's say there's a neighborhood in District 9, let's take Park Hill. Is Park Hill a community of interest similar to Worth Heights or Rosemont? Or does Rosemont and Worth Heights have more in common with Polytechnic Heights in District 8? Just throwing that out rhetorically for later on as we move forward with maps and redistricting. Let's continue.
So the other thing that I said that I would demonstrate is how to utilize the transparency and the comparison tool. So if you have a map that you want to see the underlying information, there's these 3 ellipses dots to the right, and then there's an option for transparency. So as you move it, the opacity intensifies. So as you're comparing 2 maps, you have them each turned on, and then you have the slider bar on the right. So as you compare map A and B, you can see how they differ. And you can do the items will show in your swipe layer as they're turned on in your layer list. So if you want to compare A and C, the preference is the map that's on top is the one that's your swipe layer, just because of the way they're nested. If y'all have any further questions or issues on this,
No, I would just ask staff to provide a PDF of the list of all of the communities of interest, and then another PDF of the terms you called communities of interest adjusted, all the, just a PDF file with each different, a classification and the communities of interest under each classification.
and there is.
All right. Just send that in a PDF by email. Mr. Costa and staff have been very good. Like the maps have been sent by PDF. I know they're available on the web.
And they're also going to be in the binder that you're getting shortly.
Oh, we're gonna get a binder, all right. Thank you, you're ahead of the curve. Communities of interest from staff, Ms. Boyd.
I just want to ask, like, when you just had your map up, it had the council people's names. That doesn't work on ours, on our online? Is that something?
No, it is.
Do I have to
It's
just keep
down
scrolling?
here,
That's
the
what I couldn't find.
2010 council boundaries.
Thank you.
We didn't turn those on by default because we didn't assume that you wanted to see current boundaries while looking for potential, but for comparison.
I just said, I know I saw like just the people's names to help understand.
Yes, the boundary and the name is on the map.
Any other questions about communities of interest or where to get this information, where to look? Thank you, so far, excellent information. All right, with that, we're gonna take, I said 5 minutes, but let's go 10 minutes for those that need to take a restroom break, stretch. We're about to get into the nuts and bolts. We're gonna start looking at maps and data, fun stuff. So we will recess and convene shortly. I restart this meeting and from our recess. And so the next part of our task force meeting, now that we've been briefed on census data, redistricting criteria and the like, is to look at the proposed maps. I was very impressed by how many maps were submitted. This is very, very impressive. And I want to thank staff and all the members of the prior task force because, and the prior chair, Lorraine Miller, because there was an unprecedented level of outreach despite it being done in COVID. And, this really, I thought, spread awareness throughout the city, English and Spanish, and then the training sessions for the redistricting software. So I think I was here when the last census was done and redistricting in 2010, 2011. This exceeds that. And then I was here as a citizen, obviously, in 1990 and 80, and I wasn't as engaged then, but this level of outreach was very, very good. And I think that's why we have a lot of maps. So with that, I'll turn it over to staff and lead us through the proposed district maps. Mr. McAvoy?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And so what you each have in front of you is a binder with a map and a table, which is going to be essentially the evaluation of that submitted map. You also will see that on the screen as we go through, and you also received these documents via email, I believe. And so the purpose for the binder is just to help make comparison easier as we're going through and having the discussion. So you've got the information available to you to go forward, backward, put two side by side if you want to do that. And so another thing that I want to point out at the outset in response to Mr. Shore's earlier question, we did not, in the 2020 census presentation that we already covered, have the voting age population by ethnicity and race demographic. In each of the maps that have been submitted, in the table that you see that's associated with the map, you will find that data for each of the 10 proposed districts in each of the maps that have been submitted. So if you look at the table, you will see that information. The acronym is VAP%, and you'll be able to track that and compare that as you go through. So before we get started, any questions about the binder or any of the other details before we get started? Yes, sir.
I just have one question concerning
Turn on your mic.
I had one question concerning a statistic that I don't see, and I don't know whether this is something that you can deal with or not. It has to do with anticipated growth based upon the trend. So there's not a column here saying, projected 2030 size of this citizen district. So I'm thinking we had District 7 swell up to humongous proportions at the last redistricting. And this time, we were wanting to use, I think, that plus or minus 5% factor so that to accommodate growth, but I don't know, do we see growth anywhere here yet? Projected growth?
We have not, as we saw in the earlier presentation, we have kind of an overall projection of growth. But I do not believe, and I'm looking out to staff for confirmation, I do not believe we project that growth based on race and ethnicity. Is that correct?
I wasn't talking about race and ethnicity. I was just talking about the
total
population of the citizen map. So for each citizen map, we have the existing population.
Sorry, I misunderstood your
But
question.
can we also have a projected, so I mean, one citizen map might, be higher in population and yet also have the highest anticipated growth. And that would be a factor strongly against that map, I would think.
I think one of the challenges with that, we can probably get close and provide some semblance of that. I think the challenge with that is that the geographies that are used to project population won't necessarily fit within the proposed council district boundaries, because they are not one of the criteria that the task force used, because those are set by the COG, and those projected numbers don't necessarily fit wholly within a proposed council district boundary. We could probably get somewhat close, but not precise with respect to the proposed boundaries.
I think
That's going to be the challenge.
I think anything that would provide any guidance to us at all would be helpful.
Mr., you through Mr. Shirk, because Mr. DeVito had a question. Mr. DeVito?
Thank you. Yes, I was hoping that maybe Fernando could speak to the council-adopted map. I know previously we had seen 4 excellent maps, 3 moon variations and a Williams-Nettles, and now we have an adopted map by
That's right.
the city council. How are we to weight that?
You're not to wait at all. In fact, my preference would have been, and I think it was just a function of time, that it not be identified in your binder as a council adopted map, that you treat it merely as one of 18 maps in the first blush. Now, we are not intending to withhold information from the task force or from the public. In fact, if you want to find out who submitted each map, just turn to the city website and you can see it. But in the interest of trying to minimize the impact of subconscious bias on any of us, we're identifying them as map A, map B, map C, and so forth. But again, it's no secret. And after today, at some point, if you'd like to begin identifying maps by the name of the author, we're happy to do that. That information is publicly available. Now, back to your original question. The council had a discussion last week about 4 maps that they considered. Their intent was to try to select a map that represented broad consensus among the council members. They were sharply split, and they decided to schedule another meeting for yesterday, which they did. They had a special called meeting that had been the subject of a notice 10 days before, in accordance with the procedures that you recommended. Any map drawing meeting has to be, by the council, has to be the subject of public notice at least 10 days before the date of that meeting. They had the meeting yesterday. They considered not only those 4 maps from the previous week, but 2 additional maps. One map was cited as Williams Nettles Moon, and the other map was Moon Bluebonnet Mockingbird, Moon Mockingbird 3.3. And they finally voted. I think the vote was 5-3. They were still split, but they voted in favor of Williams Nettles Moon as revised during yesterday's meeting. So what you have in front of you is Williams Nettles Moon revised from yesterday's meeting. If you want to experience yesterday's discussion. You can watch it by video at the city's website. It's painful, but you can watch it. And that was the basis for this map.
Fernando, I would also note that there was.
I'll come to you, Mr. Norris.
It was a 5-3 vote. There were 3 council members who were voting in favor of the, I believe it was the Mockingbird.
They've
3.3.
yes, they had an initial vote that did not pass, and then although there is Councilor Moon made a substitute motion which did not pass, and there were three who evidently did favor Mockingbird 3.3. Which I believe Councilor Moon is submitting, even though we did not contemplate this, Mayor Parker suggested that Councilor Moon submit it as a citizen map, and we have accepted it as such. So I believe that is included in the binder.
Not yet.
Not in the binder? But we'll make it available. Okay, we learned about this literally minutes before this afternoon's meeting. So you will be able to consider Moon Mockingbird 3.3 as a citizen proposed map.
I just found it odd that the council essentially recommended a map to us, when in fact the job of this task force is to recommend a map to them.
You're not the only one, Mr. DeVito, in Fort Worth that had that same sentiment. I'll just lay it out on the line. Some citizens believe that the citizens should draw the maps and not the elected officials. Obviously, under the charter, the city council has to adopt and approve their map, and if this body sends a map to the council, they have the prerogative to also accept that map, modify it, or change it, or substitute an entirely different map.
See, I'm just hoping that their adoption, or however we should phrase that map.
Adoption is probably too strong a term. It's a map that they selected yesterday.
I just hope that
And
doesn't
may I
affect
weigh
the
in on that?
objectivity.
Hold on a second,
Even
one
though
at a
it's a
time.
map
Go
that
ahead,
they
Ms.
selected,
Yes.
the citizens selected them. So the map that they selected still represent the citizen. So I
As I
think
said, I just
it's
hope that
very
doesn't
important
affect
that
That's
it
a
is
good point.
considered.
That is a good point. We do, they are representing the council members of the council districts they elected. Just in terms of process, from a best governance practice, sometimes some cities, this city did not choose this option. They would, and we've had this before in prior, so I'm not gonna rehash it. They either do independent redistricting committees or independent redistricting commissions, and then they recommend a map. And certainly the council still has a prerogative to adopt any map that they wish to adopt. And again, they were duly elected, and they certainly have that prerogative. So excellent point, Ms. Powell. Hold on, I was gonna go to Mr. Norris and then to Mr. Williams. Mr. Norris.
Yeah, Fernando, maybe you can just clarify then, kind of in the spirit of that discussion, what we're going to be asked to
Yes, sir.
decide.
Yes, sir.
We've got these maps, so as we start to look at them,
Yes, sir.
what's the question going to be posed to us?
The question posed to the redistricting task force is which of these 18 maps, actually 19 maps, the 17 originally submitted by citizens, plus the Moon map, plus the council map, total of 19 maps, which one, in your opinion, as a task force, should serve as the initial map for the city council to use in redrawing council district boundaries? After you submit your map to the council, they are required by the adopted procedures to justify any changes, to explain any changes to that map. So your map will carry a great deal of weight as a starting point for the council's activities. You are to select one of those 19 maps. Now, a question did come up earlier today, and I'd like to answer it. Do you have the discretion to modify a map? I believe the answer is yes. Even though the council resolution didn't specifically contemplate the task force doing so, it didn't prohibit the council from doing so, the task force from doing so. I think you will agree that it's appropriate for the task force, in the interest of providing the council with the best initial map it can get, to feel at liberty to make adjustments even to the map that you prefer to be considered.
Mr. Norris had the floor, and I'm going to Mr. Williams, then Ms. Boyd, and then Ms. Kennedy. Do you still want to have a question? Okay, Mr. Williams and then Ms. Boyd.
Well, I guess my whole thing is, I'm having a problem with all this now. First thing is, if we have been given the responsibility of coming back to them with a recommendation, with a map, then I am very offended for them to send me something that says adopted council map. I'm very offended. In other words, if we have a responsibility, then I want them to uphold that responsibility and don't get ahead of where we are supposed to be, because we're wasting our time. If this is what they decide that they want to do, and they're having votes behind us, sending to us adopted council map, I just have a very, very bad feeling about even being here, even though they're elected by the people to be in those positions. Well, now, if you are going to take that attitude, that you are being elected by citizens to do this, well, why have somebody else doing this, and then you're gonna come up and decide that you wanna do something totally different? I just really have a problem. And I don't know of any councils that I've been involved with for the last 45 years that have acted this way to do this in regards to the fact of disrespecting the committee that we're serving on. I just have a basic problem for them to even be behind the doors, being in council meeting, and then they're voting on something like this. I just have a problem with that, and I'm gonna be honest, if that's the way they feel, I could be out playing golf right now. Nice day outside. Played yesterday. And the point is that if I'm given a responsibility, I'm gonna do what you have assigned me to do, and I'm gonna try to do it the best that I can. But I don't want you behind my back doing something like this and then sending this to us saying this is adopted council map. That says a whole lot when you say adopted council map. That says that they've already made their minds up. And so I just would like for you, Fernando, to really find out exactly what they are expecting us to do. Are they wanting us to get a map to them? Or they've already accepted this?
The council is charging the task force with responsibility to recommend an initial map, considering all 19 maps, with the council selected map being only one of those 19. And you should not give any more weight to that map than you would give to any other map.
I guess I'm just appalled at the thinking of the council members and the mayor to even go through this process and then expect us to give to them something, and then I don't even know if they will even accept what we will send to them. I just have a problem even trying to get a map to send to them, knowing that they may accept it or may not accept it. I just have a problem with this process and what they're doing. I really do. And it's a waste of time for us to be here trying to do the best we can with you all giving us all information the best you can, and we're listening to it, and we're trying to abide by what the information that they have already voted on, and as far as the process, and then for them to come up behind our back and do something like this, as if though, oh, y'all can go ahead and look at those 17 maps or 18 maps, but when you finish with it, yeah, y'all recommend us a map, and we may or may not even think about it. We may or may not, because if that's the way they are doing with the 5-3 vote that you said has already gone through this, it's to me a situation whereas I would hope that we would have been given the opportunity to come down and make a final recommendation to them in front of them, whereas if there are questions, then we as a group can defend why we are recommending this map as it is.
You will have the opportunity, through your chairman, to present your recommendation to the city council at the January 4th city council work session.
And I would say, Mr. Williams, we need your expertise, every task force member's expertise. I will say that I will take the council in good faith. They are duly elected representatives, and being a council member, as you know, is a hard job. And so I think we do our job. We treat, as Fernando said, we treat their map along with all the other maps, and we do our job, we do our homework, and ultimately, in good faith, we all work together to come up with a recommended map that we, all of us, in good conscience, believe is a good map for the citizens of Fort Worth. Ms. Boyd, and then I'll go to Mr. Hermosillo.
I just wanted to clarify, at what process citizens will be able to come back in to give us feedback, or is that a part of, can you remind me of when that happens?
Sure. At every meeting of the redistricting task force, we would like to have an agenda item for public presentations. I believe today we have at least one speaker who has registered to speak. And you'll have that opportunity at every task force meeting. In addition, you will have a public hearing scheduled for December 8th, which is a Wednesday. And at that time, we would encourage the author of each map to appear before you and provide you with an explanation. You will already have conducted an objective evaluation. But before you make a selection, you'll want to hear directly from the author, what was the rationale for formulating that map in the way that it was designed? And that may influence your decision. You may have narrowed your choice to a handful of maps that all appear to be very strong. Then it becomes, I think, valuable to hear directly from the author, why is one map possibly superior to another? You may not be able to discern that information merely from the objective data. And so you'll want to have that public hearing, and only after that public hearing will you want to weigh all the evidence, discuss pros and cons, and make a recommendation to the city council.
And that's why I asked that, because I know the public wants to know. But also, after we make a decision on one map, there's not another opportunity for the public to give feedback on what we selected to propose.
Well, once the task force selects an initial map, the city council will have a public hearing on that initial map, so that the public can say, yes, we like the task force recommendation, or we don't for whatever reason. The council then will be able to draw its own proposed map, which may or may not look like the version that you see in your binder from the city council. And after they prepare a proposed map in a public meeting, duly advertised, then they are obligated, according to the procedures that they adopted, to hold at least 4 public hearings in venues around the city by paired council districts to receive additional comments on the proposed map. Then they'll be able to produce a final map and adopt that map. So again, the word adopt actually only has meaning in terms of what they finally do at the end of this process in February. Until then, I think the word selected probably better describes the map that you see in your binder.
All right, Ms. Hermosillo had a question.
Okay, so, well, I'm encouraged by, so I understand that there's 4 opportunities following the task force recommended map back to city council.
At least 5 opportunities in public hearings. The initial public hearing before they draw any maps, and then the 4 public hearings on the proposed map.
Okay. Okay, because I wondered if there needed to be another one in addition to the December 8th prior to the task force making their recommendation, just simply to allow for greater opportunity for input from the public. And I don't know if there's even any value in just doing one as a virtual one, if logistically it's not possible to hold a second one, again, prior to the task force's recommendation back to council. And then it has already been brought to my attention that the public, while all of these 17 maps have already been made available as PDFs on the website, and it's really easy to navigate to that. They don't have the ability to zoom in such that.
Yes, you do, you do. You have web versions, I
To-
believe. Please, Michelle Swindle, would you please come to the mic? My understanding is that you can zoom.
To the street level.
So there's the PDF that is published on the website,
Mm-hmm.
and the map viewer that we sent you allows you to zoom in to the street level. So that's where you
Correct.
do that comparison.
But she's
But
asking about
can
the public.
Can the public also, that's sort of the request, actually?
Currently, if they have an account, they can go back into the portal where citizens submitted. and
Okay.
all of the public maps, all of the submitted maps are now made available publicly to quote everyone. So if you have an account, you can log in and see all of the table demographic information as
Okay.
well as zoom in to the street level.
Okay, so then, if somebody doesn't currently have an account, are they still able to create an account to
Yes.
access that level of detail? Okay, thank you.
You bet.
And then just my final comment is that I am encouraged by the fact that Fernando's clarified that this task force does have the ability to review all of the maps, make modifications potentially as we see fit, and ultimately potentially even send forth to council a recommended map that could be a version of one of these with some modifications by this task force. So to that end, I just want to make that abundantly clear to any of the public that's listening, and I am encouraged by that process and that capability. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments or questions, Mr. Scher, and then I'll come back to anyone else. I'll put on your microphone. Is your microphone on? I'm sorry.
I also found it encouraging that we could make adjustments to the map. But having watched some of the council sessions, I watched the first session, it's trying to adjust maps is sort of a painful process. And every time you change one piece of the map, you have to change another because just to keep the populations equal. And I find it difficult to picture how this body is actually going to do that, given the number of meetings we have scheduled and the time allotted. I mean, it took the council many, many sessions to do this. And I mean, I can picture if I said, I like map A, but I think this community of interest needs to be adjusted, that might be a simple thing. But if I start talking about drawing all new boundaries, that's
If the council, if the task force were to start drawing maps from scratch, I think that would be inconsistent with the charge that the city council is giving. The council has asked you to select a map from among those maps that you have received. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't make some minor modifications of such a nature that they should not require an extensive amount of time. So as you say, if you like map A and you want to adjust a boundary to protect a community of interest, and it displaces a population of 100 or so persons, that's not likely to change the degree to which the map meets the criteria. So I don't think that should prevent, the fact that you may want to engage in some adjustments should not require so much time as to delay your work.
So it would sound to me like we should come in prepared to the meeting and say, okay, I've looked at these maps, I like this map, and I'd like this adjustment made to that.
I would suggest that you make adjustments when you get to the end of the process, your final meeting, and you select a map that you like. Then I would suggest you feel free at that point to adjust the maps. I would advise you against modifying any of these maps because people will have pride of ownership in these maps. Select a map after the public hearing. Select a map after the public hearing, and then before you take a final vote, feel free to make modifications. But don't mess with the maps that you've got in front of you.
Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams, did you have any other
Yes,
comments?
I just have one more thing to say, because these maps, when you go look at them, most of them, 90% of them is by an N. Watkins.
No, and Watkins, that's a staff member, Natalie Watkins.
that's
She
who that
just
is?
produced the numbers.
I'm glad she did. Well, because I looked at all these.
No.
last night.
Ms. Watkins was simply evaluated the maps.
I'm glad of that.
No, each map was
I went through
produced
all of
by,
these last night, and I went through the ones that I wanted to say no go, and what I wrote on mine. that
Good.
I have here, no go, just because they just kind of,
sure.
it's a waste of time.
No, each map, and again, you can go to the city's website and find the author of
That's
each
all
map.
right.
It'll
You
be-
gonna explain that these were made by someone else.
Yes,
But
it-
I'm just saying that I went through them
Yes.
last night, and what I did, I just wrote through here and looked at the amount of the percentages.
Yes.
All of that kind of stuff. I went through all of that, and I went through all this last night, looking at this, and I have, written out no go, okay, and this kind of thing.
Each of you, you should go through a similar exercise and then pool your thoughts so that you can reach a consensus.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Any other comments? Mr. Bradshaw?
So, a couple things. One, I agree with Mr. Williams. Just to, and again, for the history of this and for the public, this task force, the original task force, was born out of the Race and Culture Task Force, which they were tasked with a number of different things. They provided a list of 20 to 30 different things, which, I think they spent almost a year and a half, and some of those were completely disregarded by council. So this wouldn't be precedent setting. I do agree also that the fact that they front-run the process, giving us their suggested map, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, because it kind of prejudices a little bit. So that being said, and as Fernando mentioned, is that after we choose the map, the initial map, they will have to explain any modifications they make to that map. And so if the initial map that we choose looks a lot like the final map that they choose, then I would say that our efforts have been worthwhile. However, if the initial map that we choose looks nothing like the final map that they choose, then this would be a complete waste of time. And hopefully, citizens and the press will be watching intently. Oh, and the last thing. So once we all kind of get an idea of what maps we like, could we do like a ranked vote? So would that be a good process to go with?
Well, I'd like to hear from the rest of the task force members and staff, but yeah, I think the process is, and I don't know if today, we just got this, we've got the council map that was prepared just yesterday, we have all these maps, I think probably at the next meeting, y'all need to come back and we can do that, if that's the pleasure of the task force. Fernando, any thoughts?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Based on the discussion today, and we haven't even presented the first map to you yet.
Yeah.
But you're asking all the right questions.
Yeah.
I would suggest that your objective today is merely to hear a presentation from Mark McAvoy about the 19 maps, and then take time to digest it, do your homework, and come back at the next meeting, which is scheduled for December 2nd, prepared to talk about which maps you like, which maps you don't like. And I would suggest it would be a good idea to try to narrow these 19 maps down to a handful, perhaps 4 or 5, that you think are really strong in meeting the criteria, perhaps for different reasons.
Yeah.
And without necessarily disqualifying the other maps, but at least raising up those that seem to be the most compelling.
Right.
And then after you do that, at your next meeting, hold the public hearing, hear from the authors and anybody else who wants to comment, and then you'll be prepared to make a judgment from those 4 or 5 or however many you select, which one best meets the criteria, best provides for fairness and equity and so forth, and then feel free to make minor adjustments to that selected map before you vote to recommend it.
Yeah, I think we want to narrow from all these maps to maybe 4 or 5, and I guess to answer the question about ranked choice, a true ranked choice system says we're 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 goes out, 4 goes out, you vote every time after you eliminate one. I'm not sure we want to go through that exercise. I think that the idea Mr. Williams came up with, yay, no, and then be prepared after we've done this exercise of looking at the maps hearing from the citizens, here are my top 4 or 5, and then we can have a healthy debate and discussion about that. And I think Mr. Hermosillo may have a point. If there's any way to maybe do a Zoom meeting before we submit the final map to council in case there's any final tweaks, but we can talk about that at our next meeting. We don't have to make that decision today. Today is gonna be kind of long because we have to look at all these maps. So in the interest of time, let's get to those maps unless anyone has any more questions right now of staff. Any final questions so we can get out here hopefully before 5. All right. I'm not trying now. We'll take as long as it takes because this is a tremendous responsibility, right? So we can take as long as you want and you can ask as many questions and comments, and I think everybody's made their, not everybody, but I think we know where we are with a lot of folks here where we want to go as far as the process. We want the process to be open, public, transparent. We want to produce fair maps, legally defensible maps, and it's not an easy exercise for 11 members and then for citizens of Fort Worth and the council to come up with one final map. That's why redistricting is hard. Yes, Ms. Powell?
I would just like to say that I appreciate the council for their hard work and submitting a map because it does give us a guide to go by. And I think we should value their work and not discredit them because, again, at the end of the day, they are our leaders. We voted them in as well as other citizens who have submitted maps. It's not that what they have submitted is not of a good choice, but we have to look at the overall view as a whole. And again, I appreciate the council for submitting the map. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. Any other comments or questions? All right, let's move on to the maps. Hooray. Or as we say, si se puede. Yes, we can. Oh, wait, that's already been used. My apologies. Humor is good.
If I may, just
Ms. Kennedy.
ask that, can we start with Citizen Map A in respect to all of our citizens who spent a lot of time doing this, and then we can finish up with our council recommended map, please?
Absolutely. In the order that we intend to go and what, as you will see.
Excellent suggestion, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you.
We're going A through R, right? So the second map in your binder, the first map in your electronic version is labeled Citizen Map A. And so as you can see, you've got both the map and you've got a table also labeled Citizen Map A. And what the table does is essentially provide the data behind the geographic shapes that you see in the map that has been submitted. And so a couple of points of orientation. If you're looking at the table, down below, you've got a table that is labeled criterion, fully met, partially met, unmet, and comments. That is where those criterion correspond to the criteria that the task force originally set up and what Fernando covered in his presentation and what we will be happy to go back and kind of refresh memories on. I think there may be even a page in the binder that has the criteria so that you can refer back to it. But that is the assessment of each submitted map as it pertains to the 6 criteria that are currently being used. Let me back up. They're all being used that are currently being evaluated. Criteria 2 and 3, as Leann talked about earlier, we're involving outside counsel to get guidance there. And criterion number 8 is being put on hold because we do not currently have those geographies provided. And criterion 10, because of the reasons that Fernando explained earlier, is not being evaluated. So as we go through, and you'll see later in the presentation, a table of those that have met, fully met, partially met, and unmet criterion listed from high to low, they all add up to 6, and that's the reason why. So, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure exactly how you would like to go through.
Before you go, since we only have one public comment, I mean, I'll leave that open, but Mr. Herring, unless you want to stay here and look at all these maps as the chair's prerogative, be happy to take your 3-minute comment right now before we start looking at all these maps. All right, come on up if you're the only speaker here. We'll still keep citizen comment open in case anyone comes by later. Because again, go ahead and identify yourself and then give your 3 minutes of comment. And then Mr. Gonzalez, if you can start the clock. Mr. Herring, welcome.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Task Force. I'm Rick Herring, moderator for the Riverside Alliance, which is a coalition of 7 neighborhood associations and 3 community partners in the Riverside community of Fort Worth. And as Chairman Espino and Mr. Williams sort of alluded to earlier, if you're not totally familiar with that area, excuse me, we're basically north of 30, east of 35, bumping up against the Haltom City city limits. And we're sort of, the Trinity River sort of snakes around us. So in some ways, we're isolated from the rest of Fort Worth because of the natural barriers of the river. But we sent you a letter/email, and hopefully it was delivered to you by the city staff. Since the inception of single-member council districts in 1977, Riverside area has been divided into 3 districts, as you've heard already, and that's presented quite a few challenges for us as a community in trying to do all the things that we would like to do to improve and better our community. One of the reasons for that is because of the way that our community bumps up against the city limits of Haltom City. And there's always, I guess, for going on 50 years, been a need to connect sort of the east side of Fort Worth to that north part, and that was the only way they could do it. In each city council redistricting process since 1990, Riverside residents have had the same request to the city of Fort Worth and city council to unify us within one single council district. And we've been actively engaged in discussions in all of the redistricting processes since 1990. So I was involved in all of those. So this is my 4th go-round with this process. So we've seen a lot of things happen during those years. Riverside Alliance did not submit a separate map to the task force of our own, because quite frankly, almost all of the maps that you're going to evaluate through this process have included our objectives to be unified within one council district. There's a few that have not, but by and large, they have, so we're gratified with that and hope you will seriously consider our request as you evaluate all the maps. But we didn't want to add one more map for you to have to look at, since our objective is to be unified within one council district. We really don't have a strong preference as to which district that is, whether it's a north side district, an east side district, or a connector district, or whatever, however you want to phrase that. But we just want to be united within one district. And Riverside is a true geographical community of interest. We registered as a community of interest, and our community cuts across all lines of racial, ethnic, and economic composition within that one district that we're trying to get to. So I respectfully beseech you to consider our request and unify the Riverside community within one district. And I do appreciate Chairman Espino's and Mr. Williams and some of the other comments that were made already about the Riverside community. And we just appreciate your attention to our objectives and goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Herring. Appreciate that. And again, I will keep citizen comments open at the end of this meeting. All right, Mr. McAvoy, what I want to do is, as you go with each map, show the picture of the map, explain, obviously has the legends of the council districts. Maybe if you could point to each district. And then on the very first map, explain the headers and what those classifications are on the chart, on the table, right? And then you do that once, then we go each map. Here's the geographical image, here's the numbers. And I think for our purposes, rather than go through every single number for every single district, just kind of point out the key numbers, right, in each district. Total population, and then maybe voting age population, because you have to look at 2 numbers, right? Population for purposes of the districts being the same, and then also the voting age. And maybe you do that through, in a brief summary form for each map. Does that sound fair? And then if the task force wants any more data, they can ask you per each map. And then, of course, you have the criteria in the bottom. You might want to summarize those per each map. Does that sound fair?
Sure.
All right, let's begin. Let's start with citizen map A, as Ms. Kennedy requested.
All right. So for Citizen Map A, as you're looking at the map, what you will see is down in the bottom right, the legend showing the district names 2 through 11. And so what we'll see is we'll go around and identify District 2 is here, District 3 is here, District 4 is here, District 5, District 6, District 7, District 8, District 9, District 10.
Yeah, and then for future maps, after we narrow it down, we can actually superimpose the numbers. I know the legend's down there, but in future maps, we'll impose the numbers.
I did want to interject one thing. Some of the maps were not consistent voting, either going from 1 to 10 or 2 to 11. So in maps that 1 and 11 are symbolized the same. So just for consistency.
Right.
Just want to put that out.
And remember, we can only have 10 single-member districts, so the numbering, don't get confused by the numbering.
That's correct. And for this map, Citizen Map A, we went through and pointed that out. But as Michelle pointed out, some of these may be 1 through 10.
Keep going, Mr. McAvoy. For the public, this might be hard. I don't know if you can make that even bigger. Maybe the headers at the top. And then you can just recite the data. There's a magnifying glass somewhere, isn't there? I don't know. I mean, I can see it in the binder, but I'm nearsighted, so I gotta get it pretty close. Give Mr. McAvoy, genius.
All right. Lucky, I think, is a better
Every now and
description.
then.
Okay, so as we look at the data behind the map for council district, citizen submitted map A, you will see the district numbers that correspond with the legend that we just reviewed. You'll see the total population, and again, we're looking for that.
And then point at the column headers when you, like, say total population, point to that column header so the public knows, right there.
Total population here, right? And so we're looking for that total deviation that we talked about earlier that is within 9,800 of itself, right? So plus or minus 5%. So when you are looking at that total population and seeing it for each district, and then comparing that with the criterion number 1, approximately equal size, that's where you see the high-low deviation of 9,189. So in this case, we're saying that that criterion is fully met because the deviation between the highest and the lowest district is less than 9,189. So that's how we are going to follow this throughout. Okay, and so again, as we go through and we test these criteria, some of these maps will be fully met in all 6 criterion. Some will be less than that, and we'll point that out as we go. In this particular case, sorry, this is sensitive. In this particular case, we have a map, Citizen Map A, that is fully compliant in 3 criterion, partially in 2, and unmet in 1. So as we go across to the chair's preference, we have a voting age population. You can see here in this column, which is associated with the white demographic, and you can go down and you can see the various percentages for districts identified as 2 through 11. The African-American voting age population here. The Hispanic voting age population here. And as we look at some of the other data, just to kind of orient you, is this a minority opportunity district? These are all going to be determined based on our previous conversation. What you will see is whether or not this presents either an MMA or an SMMA using the city's current nomenclature MMA means that the combined minority population is greater than 50%. Super minority majority area is a combined population of greater than 75%.
All right, so we're clear, MMA, majority minority area is over 50%. SMMA, super majority minority area is 75% or greater, right?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
All right, now you see the table reflecting communities of interest, the total number in each district, the ones that are split, the ones that remain intact. Again, we don't have the voting precinct boundaries, so you'll see an NA there. Number of census block groups, and then ultimately on the far right here, the compactness score using the Polsby-Popper ratio.
On the communities of interest, those numbers obviously correspond. Is that on the chart? Like if we want to look at a map and it said split 35, 35, is there a chart that would say that number corresponds to this community of interest?
You should have a map at the very front of your binder that reflects the communities of interest and their identifying numbers.
Yes, correct. I see that. Thank you. All right, keep going, Mr. McAvoy.
Mr. Chair, I think we have a question here.
Yes, Mr. Scher?
I believe that is correct. Total population, yes.
All right, so the question, in case anyone didn't hear, because I don't know if Mr. Scher had his mic on, is the MMA and SMMA, are those based on total population? And the answer was yes. Remember, the way that the redistricting criteria is, and also under voting rights law, you also look at voting age population when analyzing whether you can create minority opportunity districts. Thank you. All right, so then I guess after you do explain down at the bottom, all of that criteria down there, 1 through 10, Mr. McAvoy, and then we can go from there to the next map if anyone doesn't have any questions after this map.
Okay, so when we are looking at the table at the bottom that has the criterion listed individually with either fully met, partially met, or unmet, you will only see marks in the ones that we previously identified. So you will not see a mark in criterion 2, 3, 8, or 10. Okay, so.
And explain why.
So for criterion 2 and 3, that's because both of those are going to be reviewed by outside counsel. And so we have not, as staff, made an assessment as to whether those criteria have been met, period. Number 8, voting precincts, is because we presently do not have the geographies as they've been identified, and so cannot, at this point, evaluate that criterion. And then number 10, which is places of residence of existing council members, we did not evaluate that criterion.
Mr. Hermosillo.
So that's calling to mind something that I think is rather important that we have done prior to the December 8th public meeting, which is ideally by our December 2nd meeting. If we have a handful, as you already outlined, I would want to make sure that the outside counsel has had an opportunity to review those and provide some further insight into criterion 2 and 3, since those are within our 5 high criteria. And we have more answers therefore in preparation for that public meeting on December 8th.
All right, staff response, Mr. Costa or Ms. Guzman, as far as when legal counsel, if we narrow the maps down to a few, can legal counsel quickly provide an opinion?
Yes, it does take them a few days in order to do that. So as long as they have enough lead time and the number is not a big number. So I'm not sure exactly how many you were thinking, but in the range of about 5, I think that would be good.
All right, thank you, Ms. Guzman. And that's right, turn on your mic. I want to remind you, please turn on your mics because it is a public meeting and we're online and on video.
Yes. So since we don't have that criteria right now, as we're reviewing, is it recommended that we look at the voting age population to make some assumptions? I just want to be clear on that as far as the opportunity district.
I would say yes, because in order to evaluate a minority opportunity district, you have to look at voting age. In terms of one person, one vote, you have to make sure that each district that the district with the largest population is not greater than 10% from the smallest district. So I would say yes, look at voting age population and then look at total population. But yes, in terms of creating opportunity districts, you want to look at the voting age population. Then another point that Ms. Guzman made, remember, there's also what we call influence districts where a certain minority population may not get to 50, but at 37 or 40%, they can elect a candidate of their choice. Or they can do that through a coalition. So a lot to think about. But yes, good point, Ms. Boyd. Mr. McAvoy, continue.
Okay, so as you look from top to bottom on the list of criterion, you will see for the ones that are either partially met or unmet, in the comments section right here, you will see a comment that's associated with the reason why it is either partially met or unmet. So looking at criterion, in this case, number 4, communities of interest, 72.4% of the communities of interest in this proposed map have been divided. And so we said that if anything greater than 50% of those were divided, this is an unmet condition, which is why you see it being evaluated as unmet in this case. If you go down to number 6, in the partially met evaluation, the Polsby-Popper ratio of each district should be greater than or equal to 0.05. In this case, District 7 is at 0.03, so it's close to 0.05, but that is the reason why it is partially met, because one of the 10 is less than 0.05.
And I would just add, staff, as we go forward, maybe on the website, explain what a Polsby-Popper ratio is, as far as in terms of compactness, because I don't think the public will understand that unless you have a definition for that. It's a very technical term. Mr. Costa, you may want to do it now for purposes of this public meeting. What is the Polsby-Popper ratio?
In the simplest terms, you heard from our outside counsel earlier that a circle is a perfectly compact form. Now, no council district is going to take the form of a perfect circle, but if you had a council district in the form of a perfect circle, it would have a Polsby-Popper ratio of 1. So the closer you get to 1, the closer it is to a perfectly compact district. As it happens, the geography of Fort Worth is so irregular that it's very difficult to have high Polsby-Popper ratios for most of the districts. And that's why the task force recommended a relatively low bar of 0.05, which is normally not very difficult to attain, except in the case of what are now districts 3 and 7 on the west side, where we have particularly irregular city limit lines, and therefore it's not entirely surprising that you'd find a district such as the current District 7 with a ratio below the 0.05.
Thank you, Fernando, for that explanation. Mr. McAvoy, if we can continue, and then I guess you've explained have you finished explaining the chart down at the bottom?
Just to finalize the comment and say that criterion number 9, the reason that is partially met is because the divided number of census block groups is greater than 25, but less than 50. Okay.
Ms. Herrera? There you go.
Could you please explain the census block groups? Did I miss something?
So
What that means?
So one of the criteria, and let me, one of the criteria that the redistricting task force adopted on this list, number 9, is that, and again, this is in the lower priority section, but that the district should contain whole census blocks or block groups. So that's where that evaluation criterion came from.
So the number represents there's 9 groups or 27 groups as you kind of go down that list?
So in this case, sorry. So in this case, in each of the identified proposed districts, you see the number of census block groups that are contained in that proposed district. And those are the ones that have been divided, right? So there are more than that in the proposed district. But in this case, for example, in proposed district number 2, there are 9 census block groups that have been divided. And so the criteria, the evaluation is that if between 25, hold on, let me get down so that makes this easier to relate to the actual criterion. For it to be, in this case, partially met, we have said that if it's between 25 and 50% divided, it can be partially met. If it's above 50%, it's unmet. And if it's below 25%, it's met, or I'm sorry, fully met.
Any other questions? Mr. McAvoy, continue.
Okay, now we are going to move on to Citizen Map B. And as you can see, the geographies. Here you'll notice that this also goes 2 through 11, but the color schema is different, right? So you'll just have to relate using the legend, the color to the geography to determine which district it's referring to. But again, number 2 through 11 in Citizen Map B. Let me zoom in. Give me a second here. Okay. So again, each district has a total population, and then it's got the breakout of the various race and ethnicity demographics, where you can see for each the white voting age population, along with the total population, the African American voting age population, and the Hispanic voting age population for each proposed district. Again, you can see whether using the city's already defined criteria, this is a majority minority area or a super majority minority area. And then with respect to the split geographic units, starting with communities of interest, the numbers split, those that remain intact, the census block groups, and then the compactness score. And when you then look at the evaluation of the criteria against the proposed map, you'll see that in this case, you have 4 fully met criterion and 2 partially met criterion. The partially met are communities of interest, because 28.9% were divided, and the compactness, because District 3 in this case has a Polsby-Popper ratio of less than 0.05. And Mr. Chair, to your previous question, Yes, I think we can put a description of this on the website to make it easier for people to understand exactly how this is calculated.
Thank you. And then I guess also census block groups. I know that's the smallest geographical unit the census uses in their vote count, in their population count. And I know you can't say how many people live in a census block or how many housing units. There may be a range of population, but in a typical census block, in the range of housing units. I know the Census Bureau has that data, but each census block is different. Then to get even more technical, there's census tracts, which are composed of census block. We're not gonna get that technical. Just explain what a census block is to the citizens. And you've already done that here in this meeting, but also put that on the website.
I'm going to ask Michelle to help answer that question.
So point of clarification, the census block is the smallest, and then it
Meant.
goes to the block group,
Yeah.
and then it goes to the tract.
That's right, I forgot about the tract. So it's census block, then census block group, then the tract. Thank you for the
Correct. And
clarification.
so I think of it as a building block, and that's what the census blocks are, and that's how all of the geographies that we use census data for are built. And just to know, for you to know where those numbers come from, it's 533 are the number of census block groups that are within city limits of Fort Worth.
If y'all could put that on the website, that'd be great. Explain what a census block group and how many are in Fort Worth. Thank you.
And so one other thing that I neglected to point out when we were looking at Citizen Map A is that there is also a opportunity for the submitter to provide the evaluator with kind of a comment. And it may, in some cases, contain an overarching goal or some additional clarification, which you will see immediately below the evaluation matrix that we just reviewed. So in this case, you'll see it here. And so this particular submitter wants us to know that compact districts with major highways and landmarks as borders. Some of them will have a far more detailed comment, some not as detailed. Yes, sir.
So this submitter has said major highways and borders. I know we can see streets and highways. On these maps, how do we see things like the Trinity River?
So as, do you want to?
So there is a base map. So there is a base map specifically for the website that you can change, and you can look at aerial imagery instead of this. This one does have water features as well, but you're correct, they're not as prevalent. Not in the PDF version, but they are in the online versions, both the portal as well as the map viewer we created.
So which one would we choose to see rivers?
Either virtual option will have rivers, though we'll have waterways.
Okay.
And that's what I wanted to make sure that we pointed out. In the static PDF that we're looking at right now, we don't have that capability, but in the online tool, you can manipulate it to see those features.
Citizen Map B. And again, task force, we'll keep looking at total population and the deviation numbers and also look at voting age population. Thank you.
All right, so moving on to Citizen Map C. See here again, numbered 2 through 11. So for the benefit of those watching online, you've got the legend down here that corresponds with the district boundary that has been proposed.
I have a legal question. I know that on communities of interest, it's one of our criteria, if they're either partially met or unmet, but everyone likes that map. I guess we look at the totality of the circumstances, or is that an automatic disqualification? You look at the totality. Legal counsel Leann Guzman is advising me, you look at the totality of the circumstances. So we like a map, but it's either not meeting all of the community's interests, it's either partially met or unmet. We have to look at the total circumstances and factors. Thank you. Keep going, Mr.
Okay, so looking at Citizen Map C and the table of data, Again, we see total population for districts on the far left, and then as we go to the right, we see the different demographic breakdowns to include the voting age population percentage for the white alone population, African American population, and Hispanic population. As we scroll over, again, we get the sense of whether that particular district boundary as proposed constitutes either a majority-minority area or a super majority-minority area. The split geographies with community of interest, census block groups, and then the Polsby-Popper ratio. And in this case, for Citizen Map C, again, we have, of the criterion that we're evaluating, we have 4 that have been fully met and 2 that have been partially met. The 2 that have been partially met are communities of interest. 27.6% have been divided, and compactness, where District 3, again, is 0.03, which is less than 0.05. And you can see here on the comments, there are some additional details that the submitter wants the evaluator to know.
Question.
Mr. Hermosillo?
Because the commenter specifically referenced Riverside Alliance, as I'm trying to eyeball our communities of interest map with Citizen Map C, Riverside Alliance is split into 2 districts, correct?
Let's see.
I mean, it appears to me it's split between 2 and 8.
Need to see where Bonnie Bray falls, because that looks like it's either Bonnie Bray or, I'm trying to figure out where 28th Street is there.
That looks correct, yes.
Mr. DeVito?
Just real briefly, if you look at the communities of interest maps, it is item 41 or number 41.
Right.
And then if you come over here to the table, under number of split geographic units, it will show, if it shows a 41 under split, then that'll indicate that particular community of interest is split.
Excellent point,
Thank you.
Mr. DeVito. Very well done, sir. Obviously, a sharp eye. Mr. Scher?
So in this particular case, the commenter's statement that his intention was to put the Riverside, to have the Riverside Alliance be together, it sounds like that did not happen. So there's a difference of opinion between the submitter and city staff evaluating the map as to whether this has succeeded or not. So
Well, yeah, and I want to clarify that staff isn't necessarily staff is evaluating the data as it relates to the criteria. Staff is not necessarily evaluating the submitter's stated goal in the abstract, right? And in this case, the comment is that they're moving it from District 4 to District 2 to join the rest of Riverside Alliance. It doesn't necessarily say that their goal is to keep a certain community of interest intact.
And remember, the alliance may be one community of interest, but then each individual neighborhood, like, is there a community of interest between Oakhurst and, let's say, United Riverside? Are they similar? I know you heard from Mr. Herring, but, reasonable minds can agree or disagree on that assessment. Questions on this one? Mr. McAvoy, continue.
Okay, now we're looking at Citizen Map D. Again, labeled districts 2 through 11. And you can see as you go through these that some of these you start to see the differences in the shapes of districts as you start to view some of these submitted maps. As we get down and look at the data and evaluation, again, remember that we have the total deviation that we're looking at is within, from most populous to least, is essentially 9,180, right? And so the total populations vary a little bit, but it's that total deviation that we're looking at. And so you see as we move from left to right, again, the same breakdowns of demographic populations and voting age populations in each of those proposed districts. Whether or not they constitute an MMA or SMMA, and then the communities of interest splits, census blocks, and Polsby Popper. If we get down to the criteria assessment situation, here is that 4 criteria are fully met, 2 are partially met, and some of these look very similar. Now we've said this is the third one where we've got essentially the same breakdown of communities of interest being partially met. 27.6 of them are divided, and compactness is partially met. In this case, District 7 is the one that is less than 0.05 Polsby Popper ratio with a 0.04 score or ratio. And then as you'll notice, there was no additional comment provided with this submitted map.
Comments on these? Please continue, Mr. McAvoy.
Okay, on to Citizen Map E. Where you can see here there are some pretty distinct differences as you start to see some of the shapes of districts here in this proposed map versus some of the earlier versions, or earlier submissions rather. So again, labeled districts 2 through 11. And as you can see the spreads here now with, again, with total population and all of the other demographic criteria as you move from left to right. Whether each district constitutes an SMMA or MMA, and then the geographic unit splits with communities of interest, census block groups, and then your Polsby Popper ratings, or ratios, I'm sorry, on the far right. With the evaluation here again, we have 4 criteria fully met, 2 partially met. The partially mets are communities of interest, where in this case 34.2% of those communities are divided, And with compactness, district, in this case, we have two districts that are below the 0.05 ratio. District 3 and 7 both come in at 0.04. And again, on this one, no additional comment by the submitter.
Any questions or comments on this map? No, we're absorbing a lot of data, so when Mr. McAvoy gets halfway through the maps, which I guess would be map, what, I, J, or K, we'll stop, and then we take another quick break. Because this is, we really are looking at a lot of data. So keep going, Mr. McAvoy, if no one has any questions on this one.
All right. Citizen map F. Right, again, labeled District 2 through 11. You see all of your demographic data there again. Your split geographies. And your compactness rating using Polsby-Popper ratio.
And then while you're explaining that, Mr. Mayor, I think it would also be helpful from staff if, after today's meeting, I know the maps may have it, but maybe a summary of each map with a summary of, I know it has it in here, but which ones, I guess, to make it easy in our analysis, like a little chart showing like which ones are with voting age population, which ones have, you know, or maybe better yet, the part that says MMA and SMMA, that might help, right? Because we do eventually have to look at both all the criteria plus opportunity districts. That might be helpful. All right, keep going, Mr. McAvoy.
Let's see, evaluation criteria here, 4 fully met, 2 partially met. Again, the communities of interest and the compactness are those that are partially met, with 32.9% of the communities of interest being divided. And in this case, District 3 has a Polsby-Popper ratio of 0.04.
Any questions on this one? All right, let's move on to the next one.
Okay, citizen map G. In some of these, as you'll notice, the number and the color as we go through is not always consistent. So make sure that as you're looking at the map that you're following the legend for that specific map to make sure that you're corresponding it to the right district boundary. Again, this is citizen map G, and you see the demographic information and all of the other criteria information, geographic unit splits, and Polsby-Popper ratio. In the evaluation here, in this case, we have 5 criterion that have been fully met and 1 that has been partially met. And the partially met is compactness. District 4 in this case has a Polsby-Popper ratio of 0.04. And you can see the submitter's comment as to the intent.
Again, if that's the only thing that we don't, or the task force may not like about that map, we look again at the totality of the circumstances. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Any questions on G? Okay, moving on to citizen map H. See the proposed district boundaries labeled 2 through 11. All of our demographic data. All of our geographic unit splits. And Polsby-Popper ratios. In this case, we have, according to the criteria evaluation, 4 that are fully met, 2 partially met. Communities of interest is partially met with 35.5% of those communities being divided. Compactness is partially met. In this case, District 4 has a Polsby-Popper ratio of 0.04. And in this case, the submitter specifically comments that this includes 2 Hispanic opportunity districts by voting age population.
Any questions on this map? Continue, please.
All right, now we are at Citizen Map I. There we go. To get my taskbar off of there so that the people watching can see the whole map. So again, here you see districts labeled 2 through 11. All of our demographic data. Geographic unit splits, and Polsby-Popper ratio. Evaluation reveals that we have 4 criteria that are fully met, 2 partially met. Communities of interest is partially met, with 28.9% of the communities being divided and the compactness being partially met. In this case, District 7 has a Polsby-Popper ratio of 0.04. And in this case, the comment you can see there provided creates 3 majority Hispanic districts with some additional information.
Any questions on this map? All right, continue to the next one, and then I think after that, we'll take a short break again, and then we'll finish up.
All right.
Keep going, that's fine. Y'all want to keep going? All right, let's keep going. I think everybody's ready to finish. All right, keep going, Mr. McAvoy.
All right, Citizen Map J. You notice here a difference in geographic shape that is unlike some of the others, labeled districts 2 through 11. Moving down to the demographic data. You can see here, our geographic unit splits and Polsby-Popper ratio. Looking at the evaluation, we have 4 criterion that are fully met, 1 partially met, and 1 unmet. And in this case, the communities of interest is unmet because greater than 50% of those communities are divided. And in this case, the census block groups criterion is partially met because we have 25.9% that are divided. And here you have quite a few comments.
Yeah, this one is unique in that it used attendance zones, high school attendance zones as building blocks. So this is a unique map for that reason. Any questions or comments on this one? Continue, sir.
And as I'm scrolling down, I'll take the opportunity to remind everyone who's watching online that all of these maps and data are available on our website for you to go and take a look at. So we are at Citizen Map K. Labeled districts 2 through 11. Take a look at the demographic data for our various demographies there, our geographic unit splits, and the Polsby-Popper ratio. In this case, we have 5 criterion fully met, 1 partially met. It is communities of interest. It's partially met because 26.3% of the communities are divided.
Yeah, on that one, the comment is submitted the plan to reflect the growth of Hispanic community plus 2% District 2, plus 2% District 8, and 4% District 9. Now remember, here, that's on population, it shows majority Hispanic, but if you look at voting age population, you only see one district, District 2, that is greater than 50% under Hispanic voting age population. So that's my comment on that one. Questions or comments? Proceed.
All right, Citizen Map L. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but just pointing out for the people who are watching and maybe tuning in later, just keep in mind to pay attention to the legend and follow the colors on the legend because they vary as we go map to map. Labeled districts 2 through 11. And as again, you'll review the demographic data for each proposed district. The geographic unit splits and the Polsby-Popper ratio. Looking at the evaluation criteria, we have 5 criterion that are fully met, 1 partially met. It is compactness. It is partially met because in this case, District 4 has a ratio of 0.04.
Yeah, this one, the submitter comments are about using communities of interest, and, you know, obviously that's what their criteria was, the cohesion of most communities of interest. So again, look at the data, population, and voting age, and move forward. Okay, any questions or comments on this map? Continue.
Here we have Citizen Map M. labeled districts 2 through 11. Showing demographic data for each proposed district, geographic unit, splits, and the Polsby-Popper ratio. In this case, we have all 6 criteria for which there is an evaluation fully met.
Boyd? Go ahead.
Sorry, it's about the previous map. My eyes are starting to cross. So,
Prior map, citizen map L?
yes, I was just gonna ask, can you show me or tell me where, community of interest number 56 falls with this? I think I'm just missing it, but I cannot.
Is the question which district it falls in?
And is it intact? I don't.
The stop
It's
6
historic
neighborhood.
stop 6. I'm just trying to find it on where did it land? There.
Where stop 6 falls in
Where
this
did-
map on citizen map L?
It's number 56 as far as the community of interest. I just don't see it.
It's like a Where's Waldo puzzle that we're
Right.
all.
Okay, it's not listed on the short thing. Okay. But it's where? In 2? Right, but it's in District 2. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I think it would be, all right, so it's on the east side of 35, right? Stop 6. It's there in the board, you keep going east. I can't tell where Rosedale is on that map. So if you go on Rosedale, it looks like it's either in the green, right? Well, there's Division. That is Lancaster, so Rosedale's further down. So it'd be in the green, right? It'd be that District 2 in green, right?
It shows it as being split.
And it would be in this new District 2 in green, right? Or is it, yeah,
Am I on
yes.
the right one? Maybe I'm not.
Yeah, that's interesting.
No, we're on L.
It's not showing up on this as split. It's not showing up at all from what my eyes can tell me right now. Right. And I just wanted to make sure on all of them that it's up to date, like as we look at the communities of interest and all that. I just didn't see it on this one, so I was curious.
Yeah, well, we will confirm. It's possible that it's mislabeled.
Yeah, and if y'all can answer that question, Ms. Boyd, on this specific map, I'd appreciate it. All right, thank y'all. Let's move on. So we were on what, map M?
Yes. Right, so citizen map M again. Label 2 through 11.
Any questions on citizen map M? Hearing none, move forward.
All right, citizen map N. Districts labeled 2 through 11.
Just so I'm clear,
Mr. Bradshaw?
when it says District 1 here on the data table, Does that correspond to District 2 on the maps that starts with 2 on the map? No.
It would be 11.
Okay.
So a question for staff, when these districts are redone, there is not gonna be a District 1, is it gonna be a District 11 or a District 1? How is this gonna, the nomenclature? Through to 11, all right, there will not be a District 1, that's the mayor at large? All right, gotcha, thank you. On this particular map,
I'll point out that like Citizen Map M, Citizen Map N has 6 fully met criteria.
all right, please continue.
Right, Citizen Map O. Again, labeled 2 through 11. We're scrolling left to right to pick up demographic data, geographic unit splits, and the Polsby-Popper ratio. Citizen Map O has 5 fully met criterion, 1 partially met, which is compactness. District 4 has a ratio of 0.04.
Any questions on this map? If not, please continue.
We are at Citizen Map P. Labeled 2 through 11. Scrolling through demographic data, geographic unit splits, and the Polsby-Popper ratio. In this case, we have 4 criterion fully met, 2 partially met. Compactness, in this case, District 6 has a ratio of 0.04, and on census block groups, 28.1% are divided.
Any questions on this map? This one says in the comments using natural boundaries for some neighborhoods, so. Moving forward, next map.
Citizen Map Q. Labeled 2 through 11. Scrolling through demographic data, geographic unit splits, and Polsby-Popper ratio. Citizen Map Q has fully met criterion, all 6 criterion.
Any questions on this map? If not, continue.
Final map is
Yay. Is it?
Citizen Map R.
How many maps is that, 18?
That is 18.
All right, well done so far, Mr. McAvoy. Well done, Task Force. Keep going, sir.
All right, you can see here Citizen Map R, labeled as 2 through 11. This will be at the front of your binder. It was the first, and you're getting a new one here? Or is this S? This is S.
All right.
So Citizen Map R was the first map in your binder as we started this part of the presentation. So also known as the adopted council map. It is a duplicate, okay. So we're looking at Citizen Map R. So disregard the other.
All right, but it does say submitter comments, adopted map, Citizen Map R by Council 11/16/2021, revised merger of Williams Nettles amended and Williams Moon Blue Bonnet map. So this was the one that council voted on yesterday, submit to us as their official map. And I thought there was an earlier map in here that was a Mockingbird 3.3 revised, which was a map submitted as a citizen by Councilmember Moon. Is that correct? That's S? I thought I saw another one in here. Hold on.
So there was a citizen map that took the original Mockingbird.
Okay, all right,
Map
got you.
S is Mockingbird version 3, but it took
I
the
got you.
original version. and
So that
made
was,
adjustments.
I got you. Thank you for that clarification. All right, so
Thanks,
so this
Michelle.
is, thank you, that clarifies everything. Now keep this, there was another citizen that took the Mockingbird and revised it, and they submitted that as a citizen map. This is the council map that they're forwarding it to us, and then S is the map by Councilmember Moon as a citizen, not as a, all right? So let's finish R and then we'll go to S. Go ahead, Mr. McAvoy.
All right. Citizen Map R.
Do we, for S? Not yet? All right, email that to the task force, and if you have it on the computer, show it here on the screen, if you have it. If not, all right, let's go, let's finish R and then we'll deal with S next. Go ahead, Mr. McAvoy. On R, this is the map that the council voted on yesterday. Submit to us, right? R.
That's correct.
All right. Let's go.
All right, so if you're having trouble finding the data table, if there is no data table labeled Citizen Map R.
There it is.
Okay, okay.
We just don't have the citizen data table for S, but we'll get to
Okay,
that later.
got it. So Citizen Map R, scrolling to pick up the demographic data here, geographic unit splits and compactness score. And in this case, you have 4 fully met criterion and 2 partially met. The partially mets are communities of interest, where 34.2% of the communities are split, and compactness District 7, in this case, has a ratio of 0.04.
And then you may, and again, on this one, pay close attention to districts 2 and 9, because while District 2 is 62.5% Hispanic, voting age is 60.5, but then you look at District 9, it's 52.5% Hispanic, but voting age Hispanic is 47.30, less than 50%. Just want to point that out on the map that was submitted to us by the City Council. All right.
So we do not have Citizen Map S on
The screen?
the screen.
All right. And we do not have overhead projectors. That is old technology. where
I'm
you
sorry,
can-
we do. No,
We do? All
do.
right.
We do. We have a separate file. There we go.
Outstanding. Technology works wonders. I'm old enough to remember the old overhead projectors.
Forgot about the old separate file. Zoom it so we can all see here. Sorry. I'd gone it. There we go. So citizen map S. And we do not have the table for S. Okay, so it's the table that we do not have for S. Sorry about the confusion. And this was submitted fairly late in the process, so we will have that to you as soon as we have it compiled.
Okay, any questions of Citizen Map S? No questions, and so now I want to thank Mr. McAvoy for excellent job going through. I counted 19 maps, right? A through S.
With the inclusion of S, it would be 19. yes.
19 maps that have been presented, and obviously we look forward to the data table for S. So we've seen the maps prepared by the city council, by residents. There is no map prepared by city staff, is that correct? So we're not doing that because council decided that staff should not submit a map to this task force or to the council, because the citizens, elected representatives, as Ms. Powell pointed out, they wanted to submit a map. So now we go to 5 on the agenda, discussion about December 8 public hearing and the need for December 2nd task force meeting. So who's gonna address that, number 5? City staff, Mr. Costa? All right, Ms. Kennedy had a question, I apologize.
I have 2 questions. One, can we get a copy of the slideshow with all the census data? Because I'd especially like to see those areas of projected growth so that when we're evaluating, we can see if the maps account for that. And 2, I thought when we did, so we have the criteria, but we also submitted procedures. And I thought one of the procedures was that the city council would have a professional map maker create a map to be evaluated as well.
So I'll address the first one, and we will absolutely get you the presentation with the census data, and then I'll let Fernando address the question number 2.
The original task force report, which was presented by then Chair Lorraine Miller to the City Council in March, did include a recommendation that an independent consultant produce a map. The City Council decided not to proceed along those lines in the resolution that they adopted in April of this year. In April, the council said that they would entertain maps from residents and from city staff. Then in October, they adopted a resolution saying that they would entertain, that the task force should be reactivated, and that the task force should entertain maps from residents, from city staff, and from the council. And then just yesterday, they adopted another resolution dropping the requirement for a staff map and limiting the maps to residents and to the council.
Does not preclude modifying or tweaking any of those maps.
That does not preclude the task force modifying the map that the task force selects
Right,
as its preferred map.
there we go. All right, thank you for that clarification. As its preferred map, I got you. All right, right,
The task force's preferred map.
I got you. All right, any questions or comments on the procedures? Any other requests for information? Mr. Costa, move forward
Okay.
with the next item on the agenda about the.
When-
sorry,
Oh, I'm
sir.
sorry, I didn't see you, Ms. Hermosillo, I
Just
apologize.
One more question pertaining to the maps, because if I understood you correctly, you asked for like a small chart on the maps that would add clarity both to us as reviewers and to the public, whereby you requested the addition of the SMMAs and the MMAs.
Yeah, I wanted to see like each council map, I know it has the chart, but like how many of those districts are either super MMA or MMA? And obviously, we know by looking at the voting age population, which groups have 50% or more voting age population. Because what I want to clear up, if some folks say majority African-American district or majority Hispanic district, that may be the population number, but for purposes of opportunity districts, you have to look at voting age population. So that's why I was pointing out that data. But I think the MMA and SMAA will be helpful in seeing the diversity of the city and the council districts. That's why I requested a chart.
So for greater clarity to that, without it getting too busy, might it make sense to list the number of potential minority opportunity districts based on a voting age percentage of above 50% by simply denoting like H or B for the Black or Hispanic voting age percentage?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is you look at in each map, if they could do a summary of voting age population where the Hispanic population is greater than 50 or any other ethnic group greater than 50. That's what I think what you're African-American, Hispanic, and have that chart. Even though apparently legal counsel is not going to yet give an opinion on what's a true opportunity district, if I understood staff correctly, till we narrow the maps. But for purposes of our analysis, we can at least ask for a chart that shows where, if you look at voting age population, what the total number, what council districts have 50% or more Hispanic voting age, African-American voting age, Asian American, and white voting age population.
Correct.
All right? Okay, that's what Ms. Hermosillo wants. So we could do a chart for each map. Ms. Boyd?
I want to go back to something that you asked about earlier. You asked about if we will have another opportunity for, after we select the map, for the public to, you asked should we have an additional date for the public, or for us to come back after the public tells us about the map that we selected. But I don't know if there was resolve around it.
No, I think we're gonna have that discussion. I think it's a good idea. We have to look at calendars. Obviously, we're charged with giving the council a recommended map by their January 4th. Our last meeting was supposed to be December 10th. Somewhere in that window. If we're meeting on the 8th, on the 2nd, then we have the 8th public hearing, then vote up on the 10th. And the 10th is when we come up with a final map. I guess what you're asking me, is there a window between December 10th and January 4th for the public to weigh in and then for us to meet back again? With the holidays, I see it tough. I think we might want to, I don't know if this group after the public, well, we have the public hearing on the 8th. Got to look at the calendar. That's why it makes it difficult. Fernando, any thoughts?
Bear in mind, the council will be holding a public hearing on the map that you select. So unless you want to have a second hearing to reverse your own preference, there's really no need for you to have another public hearing, because the public will have the opportunity to comment on the task force's preferred map.
But that's only on the 8th, I guess, was just the
Yes.
question I posed earlier, is might it make sense to have even potentially a virtual one prior to the 8th? And maybe that's not possible, but yes, I wasn't necessarily asking council to delay the action that they're looking to perform on the 8th.
We could, one option, if your point is to have virtual access, we could have virtual access to the in-person public hearing. Michelle, do you want to comment on that? Michelle Goot?
I don't know that will.
If your point is about having virtual access, I think we can accommodate it without having to have another
Yeah, I think
meeting.
we're getting confused. What Mr. Hermosillo, Ms. Boyd want is once the initial map, we all come to consensus, this is the map. I think they want the public to weigh in if there's any final tweaks to make after we vote on a map, right? And if there's any final tweaks that can be done to that map before sending it to council. I think that's what Ms. Hermosillo, Ms. Boyd are looking at.
And simply to provide more than one date, more than one opportunity for greater public input.
We could also look at having just a way for people to comment and provide their input in addition to the public hearing, where they would just be able to send it in. We could give them a date range and say during this time, send your comments, and then we can compile that and get that to you. That might be another option.
I think council
are
wanted
one
an
day.
expedited schedule because they want to wrap this up fairly quickly. You can make an argument that it should have been a longer time period, but this is what the council decided. So that's why we're up against the holiday schedule, right? It's, in a perfect world, you would want to have more time, but the council wants to address this issue very thoroughly and efficiently in the shortest amount of time possible, I think. And I'm not putting words in their mouth. I think they want to resolve this fairly early, because even though the elections are not till May of 2023, to get citizens used to the new boundaries, and then obviously, like Fernando said, to also allow 4 meetings where the citizens can weigh in on maps, on the map that, or on the plan that we adopt, and if they tweak it on that plan, right? Did I state that fairly? That at least
Yes,
on
sir.
the city council, the public hearings, they may disagree with my analysis on why they wanted a short time frame.
The stated reason was they wanted to provide plenty of time to defend the city against any legal challenges, although the city attorney has properly commented that legal challenges could extend well beyond any timeframe that the council would allow. Also, an early timeframe would allow potential candidates more time to consider relocating into a district that they wish to represent in the 2023 election.
A residency requirement, obviously you have to live in a council district so much time before you can file and run for that district.
6 months before you file for candidacy.
That's right. Any questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Williams.
Yep, I got to say one more thing. You know, being involved with the ideas of putting the maps together, people have time to, it's been announced, they've had opportunities, the staff has gone out and they've talked with people. It's been circulated in regards to your input that we're wanting to get here. But I'm thinking that what we don't need to just be BSing around with the redistricting like I'm hearing what we're talking about. If we can put a map together that will be the summary of most of the people in Fort Worth, then we will be in a position to present that to the city council. Now, I don't know what's happening with the city council in the sense that they're asking us to do a job, and then since it seemed like that we need to have a meeting with them like what we have here with ourselves, they need to be with us in the sense that we need to be talking to them and seeing where are their minds? What is it that they're really trying to do and trying to get to? Are we trying to get a map that would be one that would be fair and equitable to everyone? Plus, at the same time, you know, you can't just really set a situation whereas you know a one person is going to be selected. You have to get a representative that's going to represent your district that the district can accept. And it's not just in one racial deal, it's across the board. You've got to be presentable to everybody, or mostly everybody, at least 51% of everybody that's in that district. Rather than trying to say, because I have the majority numbers, it doesn't mean that they're gonna vote for me anyway. Because a lot of people don't vote for you because you are of their race. Because when I was running, there were some people that didn't vote for me who were blacks. But the point is, there were not enough of them. And I was able to get other people, other races, all around me, because I tried to make myself presentable to everybody. And that is what you have to do, and that's what, and we can't legislate that. You can't put that in a paper to give to anyone to vote on. That's just not there. But I'm hoping that what we can do, that we can come up with a map ourselves. And that's the reason I want to make sure, I hope if we can do this, is to get the individuals on the council to meet with us. I mean, I don't know if it means that we have to have a meeting, whereas I know we had to put that 72-hour deal out, but that's fine. But we need to make sure that we can sit down and if they disagree with anything that we have in our map, let them tell us, what is it that you want to put in here that is going to be so much different? Because just to, I don't know, I'm just confused now in the sense of what we're trying to do as a group and what the city council is really trying to do. Because I think there might be some hidden agendas that we might be hearing. I'm hoping that it's not that way. But I'm really hoping that we can get together and come together as a group. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. DeVito.
I think the council is trying to maintain a sense of independence for our body, our work. And I think a joint meeting with them would violate the independence that they're trying to maintain for us. I understand what you're saying. I personally think maybe the submission of their adopted quote-unquote map sort of violates that already, but, you know, if we can maintain objectivity, even despite that submission, but I believe the reason that we act independently is that they want to have that separation, that level of
I
independence.
hope so. I'm for all of that. I'm for what's right and what's fair. And working with people. I don't have no problem with that. But I think that we need to make sure that we are doing what is right for the citizens of Fort Worth. And that we are giving them the accountability to be a part of this process. And to me, that's all I want.
Yeah, I think we all want, you know, transparency, openness. We want legal, fair, and equitable maps. The council established this procedure. We all agreed to serve because we all have the public interest at heart. The council members were elected. I think they're people of good faith. We may disagree with the process, but reasonable minds can differ. So we'll keep working through this because, again, this is a very important, it happens every 10 years. And I want to thank all of the task force members for stepping up and serving both on the prior task force, for the members that served on that, and for the newer ones. God bless you, because this is really a tough task. Council took several meetings to come up with a map. We're supposed to evaluate 19 maps, you know, and council did, I don't know, 4, 5, 6. So we're ahead of the game and ahead of the curve. So thank you. Fernando, any
Yes, sir.
closing comments or thoughts?
Yes, sir.
Before I go to citizen comments,
Yes, sir.
and then close it out after that.
3 points. First, reminder of your upcoming meetings, and you may decide to have one more meeting than has already been scheduled, but for right now, you have another meeting scheduled for December 2nd. That's a Thursday at 3 o'clock here in room 2020. When we published the agenda for today's meeting, it was not certain that you would need another meeting, but obviously you do, in order to narrow down these 19 maps to a short list of perhaps 5. So we can confirm your meeting for December 2nd, and we will prepare an agenda for that meeting. You would then hold a public hearing on the following week, Wednesday, December 8th at 6 o'clock in the council chamber next door, to receive comments from the public, and we would want to reach out to the authors of these maps to give them an opportunity to make their case directly to the task force. Then you have scheduled what is now your final meeting on Friday, December 10th at 2 o'clock back here in this room, at which time you'll be able to consider those citizen comments and all the other data that you've discussed in order to select your preferred map, and if you wish, to adjust that map in some measure before you vote to recommend the map. We wanted to present, Mr. McAvoy has produced this additional slide that summarizes the top maps with respect to the extent to which they meet the criteria. Mark, do you want to explain the map, the table?
Sure. As we pointed out, as we were going through each individual map, you had a list of the criteria that we used and evaluated 6 criterion within that, and we explained the 4 that weren't used. And so this is just a summary from high to low for those that fully met those criteria. So you'll see that we had 3 that fully met all 6, and then 4 that met 5 with 1 partial, and then a whole slew that had 4 fully met, 2 partially met, and then finally we had a couple where we had 4 fully met, 1 partially met, 1 unmet, and then 1 with 3 fully, 2 partially, 1 unmet. So this will come to you as well, just to kind of give you a high-level summary of what each of those maps is and kind of the splits between, potential cuts that you may want to make, so.
Yeah, and then only caveat is legal has not assessed whether, the criteria for minority opportunity districts or legal compliance with the
That's
Voting
correct.
Rights Act.
Those are
So
2 of the
be
most
very
important
careful.
criteria.
And back to Ms. Kennedy's point, there were high priority criteria and lower. So
Yes,
staff
that's
might want to also break it down into high priority, because Ms. Kennedy made an outstanding point over the high priority.
The summary does
criteria.
not differentiate. Those points are right on the mark. All of which is to say, you are not obligated by any means to go by this ranking. This is just intended to be a cursory summary of what you've already seen.
Yeah, they may
So-
meet all this criteria, but they may not comply with the Voting Rights Act. I mean, just hypothetically.
Conceivably, yes.
All right.
So, Mr. Chairman, in your next meeting, December 2nd, you'll want to narrow this list of 19 to perhaps to 5. And our suggestion would be that perhaps each task force member take the opportunity in the next few days to digest all of the data we've supplied to you today. It's a lot of information. And if it makes sense to you, perhaps you could submit back to us, each individual, your top 5 maps for further consideration, and we'll tabulate them. And we'll tell you, in the aggregate, these are the maps that the task force as a whole found to meet the criteria to the greatest extent. And in the totality, would seem to be most worthy of further consideration. That might be a good starting point. Again, you're not obligated to go by the tabulation, but that might be a good starting point to narrow down your discussion. But then, once you select your top 5, according to what we heard from our legal counsel, we could get outside counsel to give us a more thorough examination of the top 5 that you select, and maybe have that information available for the public hearing, certainly for the time you have to make a final decision.
Mr. DeVito.
How should we submit that? Should that be to the entire group, our assessments and our rankings?
That's something you can decide. You can copy everybody.
Well, I don't know. We got to worry about the Open Meetings Act. Ms. Guzman, do your qualifier about communications. If you want to take the podium so the public knows this is an open, public, transparent process. Ms. Kennedy was.
Not
and I were
supposed to be
thinking the same
deliberating
thing.
outside of
Yeah, I
posted
know, we're
public
just,
meetings.
I know, but ranking maps, I think, does count for deliberation. So I would be leery. Let's figure out a way to do that in a way that complies with the wonderful Texas Open Meetings Act.
That's right. I think Mr. Espino has already said what I would have said.
Oh,
Just
okay, I'm
be
sorry.
careful not to communicate with each other with a reply all, or, all outside of the meeting. That's what this.
You
this
can send those to
conversation is.
Fernando, but don't
That's
copy
exactly
anyone
right.
else. You can have a
Yes.
one-on-one communication with Mr. Costa, but
Yes,
don't send it to everyone on the task force, because then we're deliberating and commiserating as a body.
So we'll send you a reminder to provide us with the letters of your top 5 maps. Then we'll tabulate that, just send it to staff, not to each other. We'll tabulate it and we'll provide it to you for consideration at your next meeting. And I would suggest that you provide us with your selections, let's say by before the Thanksgiving holiday, next Wednesday. That gives you a week. And if you have questions between now and then, contact any of us on the staff, and we'll be happy to help.
And you thought you didn't have any homework, all right? So we all have homework. Any questions or comments on this process? I think since you're appointed and you don't send one by the time, that just means they won't consider the rankings, yes.
Just for process, or I think it'd be more informative, instead of just, these are my top 5, can we do like a ranking, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? That means, once we tabulate, the map with the lowest score is the most favorable, so at least we're not saying, oh, these happen to be.
That's a fair suggestion. I mean, we're not doing true ranked choice voting, because only Maine and New York City and maybe a couple of other bodies do it. But that's not a bad idea. So when you submit your maps to Fernando, the ones that you thought do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and send them to Fernando. Don't share them with everybody else.
If you want to rank them 1 through 5, we can assign points. Let's say 5 points for your number 1, 1 point for your number 5, and then we'll tabulate the
Yeah,
points.
that sounds reasonable. Yeah, we got to cut through 19 maps. Mr. DeVito.
Is there any way to change the date of that December 2nd meeting? I will not be able to make that.
We can look. Time is short, and then you have 11
I'm
members.
asking everybody to make a plan change, but.
You can Zoom?
No, I'll be on the road, actually.
Okay, all right. We'll take it under advisement.
It's very difficult to find these dates.
Yeah, I hear you. It was with 11 people schedule and staff schedule. But thank you, Mr. DeVito. Feel free to weigh in. All right. Any other comments or questions on process? Then anybody here for citizen comments? One more. All right. Go up to the podium and identify. All comments are important. I wish you had told me and I would have moved you up.
I didn't see a form and I apologize.
I would have moved
Hey,
you up.
Fernando, it's Randy Daniels. I've gained 50 pounds and half of it's hair, okay? So
Mr.
you wouldn't know.
Gonzalez, start the
I'm
clock.
going to give you a rundown. I have about me and why I'm making this comment to you because it's quite different from the earlier gentleman with Riverside. My first thought about redistricting is we're going to split 7 into two districts. I think I see that in R and S, okay? Now, I think we have I have a question. Can I ask a question? Is all of this going to be made public? All of the ranking criteria and all that? And can you let a 6 be a 6 when you give a point score, let a 6 be a 6. 6 criteria met is a score of 6, and your highest score, not your lowest. We're not playing golf.
Well, all information submitted to the city of Fort Worth is public information. There are exemptions from public information disclosures.
I understand, Sal, but I'm just talking about what gets made public so that you don't get a bunch of varied, misunderstood comments back from the public to you, and they don't understand your process at all. It's quite possible.
All right.
I came into town as a young Republican born here. I've switched to Democrat. I'm your Senate District 12 guy, so when I speak about the northwest corner of Tarrant County, there's a reason, okay? And its interest groups have always been widely divided. It's 2 north and south of a district. So I want to speak in favor of your R and S that splits 7 in 2, and I have no interest and have nobody with any interest of running for City Council 7, okay? Have a psych degree. Can you change the maps to where the colors are the same from map to map? We've studied the brain now, and there's no such thing as true multitasking, okay? You can think about that for a second. When we get a number 41, everybody, your heart pitter-patters, man, I nailed that. But colors from map to map, and then get rid of the total population number. The black percentage of the total is relevant, but the number of blacks versus the number of whites, Hispanics, Asians is not relevant, and it shortens your chart side to side. Just a few comments like that. You guys are doing a fantastic job. I have a question again about the 8th. What is the 8th? We have a big political thing on the 8th. And is that
a public hearing?
That's a public hearing. It popped up when I put it in my phone. You know, now I've got to move something. But good job. I don't have strong feelings, and so I just wanted to say those things, and that's that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And if I'd known you were there sooner, I would have moved you up. But thank you for
that's okay.
laboring with us through 19 maps. All right. Any requests for anything else before we shut down? All right. With that, thank you. We're adjourned.